increasingly as this cloud builds its way in from the west. Quite a damp second half of the night for Northern Ireland, with this rain moving its way in. The humidity also just beginning to build up a touch once again. That rain then pushes its way into Scotland, Northern England and Wales for the start of Tuesday, but the far southeast and parts of the Northern Isles staying drier throughout the morning. That rain clears its way through later on in the day, but we've got further frontal systems and bands of rain ready to push their way in at points over the course of the next week. So it is looking like a relatively unsettled one. Temperatures, though, holding up around where they should be in the mid to low 20s. Bye-bye.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything, I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know,
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point. But
And action.
Read my superstar panel. They're already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News. Britain's watching.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good afternoon and welcome to GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. And for the next few hours, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and of course it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. So joining me, Going head-to-head, the former editor of The Labourist Peter Edwards and also former Brexit MEP Ben Habib. They're going head-to-head in the next hour. Then join me between 4 and 6, journalist and broadcaster Danny Kelly and author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton will be joining me live. But before we get started, let's get your latest news headlines.
Nana, thank you very much and good afternoon. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. We start with some breaking news. Humberside Police has confirmed a 15-year-old girl has died after being pulled from the sea at Cleethorpes Beach in north-east Lincolnshire. Police also say a boy who was recovered from the water was taken to hospital, but he's since been discharged. We'll bring you more on this story as we get it. Russia's president says he has every confidence in his troops who are on the front line in their continued war in Ukraine. It's after the leader of the Wagner mercenary group is now to head to Belarus. Last night, he pulled his troops out to avoid bloodshed as they headed for Moscow on what's being described as an attempted coup. They were on their way to remove Russian commanders that Yevgeny Prigozhin blames for mishandling the war in Ukraine. Ukrainian MP Alexei Goncharenko believes Putin's time is running out.
Definitely, if this mutiny would continue several days longer, better several weeks longer, that will be the end of Russian army in Ukraine. It was too quick to exploit it for our army. It was just in 24 hours. So I don't think that now it will, in short term, will change something on the battlefield. But on the middle term, it showed how weak is Russia. And I'm even more sure today in Ukrainian victory than before.
The Prime Minister has set out what he's calling the biggest workforce training expansion in the NHS. Writing in the Sunday Times, Mr Sunak said his NHS long-term workforce plan will aim to train, retain and reform the UK's experienced NHS staff. He says, as a country, we rely on attracting talented people from overseas rather than recruiting at home. Mr Sunak described the 15-year plan as the cornerstone of his government's vision for a better healthcare system. The Chancellor says raising interest rates is one of the most effective methods to curb inflation. This week, rates were hiked up to 5% from 4.5%, the 13th rise in a row and the sharpest increase since February. The move means mortgage holders are preparing for a big jump in their monthly repayments. Writing in the Mail on Sunday, Jeremy Hunt is urging those struggling to be patient with the painful measures. Chief Secretary to the Treasury, John Glenn, told GB News the Chancellor is committed to supporting the Bank of England.
As you know, the Bank of England is independent of government. We work closely with them, but they make those decisions, and they've obviously increased our rates by 0.5% last week. I'm not here to commentate, I'm here to work closely with the Bank of England. People don't want us to be squabbling amongst ourselves. What we should be doing is having a committed and united plan to deal with high inflation in our economy. That is what we're doing in government, and that is what the Governor of the Bank of England is doing with the interest rate decisions.
The final chance to see music legend Sir Elton John is fast approaching. The Rocket Man is hanging up his hat for his final show on home turf will be this evening at the Glastonbury Festival. The event's co-organiser has teased details of his Pyramid stage show, saying he's been carving out a set that's going to be completely unique to the festival. Elton fans have been queuing up to see the legendary last performance.
I turned up 3 hours after these guys. I was here at 7 a.m. I was third in the queue, and you can't miss Elton John. Last ever UK gig, Glastonbury, what a day.
Look, I kind of kept the tickets initially, but just for like Elton. So I figured like this is such a once in a lifetime chance that I can sleep any other day, but like front row Glastonbury last UK concert, that's probably going to be like a once in a lifetime chance.
You're up to date on GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Nana.
Thank you, Tatiana. Welcome aboard. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. It's time to go head-to-head, so let me introduce you to my head-to-headers. Today, it's former editor of The Labourist Peter Edwards and also former Brexit Party MEP Ben Habib. Sorry, Peter, that was quite a menacing stare that you gave. Let me show you what else is coming up.
You all know I'm a softie, really.
He is, isn't he? Right, here's what else is coming up today. I'll be asking, do you believe the West went overboard on the mutiny in Russia? Now, after Russia, mercenary fighters that were heading towards Moscow turned back after striking a deal with Russian President Vladimir Putin, do you think we kind of went overboard here in the UK? Then it's been 7 years since Brexit, since the referendum, but the country still remains deeply divided over it, with many people pinning the blame on Britain's current economic woes on its exit from the EU. What do you think? Is Brexit to blame once again? Then Jeremy Hunt has called on banks to raise interest rates for savers in order to offset the financial plan many are feeling as a result of the rising mortgage bills. But is this the right way, and is it too little too late? And then finally, St Paul's Cathedral dubbed Britain's wartime leader Winston Churchill as a white supremacist and unashamed imperialist. Do you think that's gone a little bit too far? What are your thoughts? All of that on the way in the next hour. As ever, tell me what you think on everything we're discussing. Email gbviews@gbnews.com or tweet me at gbnews. So yesterday morning, we woke up to the extraordinary news that Vladimir Putin's erstwhile allies, the Wagner Group, had launched an armed insurrection and were marching on Moscow. However, by the evening, we then heard that even more extraordinary news that the group's ruthless leader, Yevgeny Prigozhin, has called off the insurrection and would reportedly be moving to Belarus, despite the fact his troops were just 150 miles from the Russian capital. However, many are saying that despite this, his regime being spared, at least for now, President Putin has been much weakened by his whole episode, and that it is the beginning of the end of his reign. But you believe the West kind of went overboard on the mutiny in Russia. Let's go live now to Moscow and speak once again to Russian journalist Alexei Vir. Alexei, thank you very much for joining us. So there you are, you're there in the Red Square in Moscow, in Russia. What is the situation right now?
Hello, Nana. Well, it's a wonderful sunny day here in Moscow, comparing to yesterday when there was a lot of anxiety. There is still counter-terrorist operation regime here in place, but it seems everything has been resolved. It seems that the catastrophe has been avoided. We still do have some extra law enforcement here on the street, and they are wearing some heavy gear, for example, bulletproof vests and helmets. They have machine guns, which is unusual. But as you can see here, life continues. The situation here in downtown Moscow doesn't seem any different from the usual. The Red Square is still closed, but other than that, everything seems fine. Most roads now have been unblocked, and the cars are circulating as usual. So, yeah, seems the catastrophe has been avoided.
So it would appear that the conflict has been resolved. How did that come about? What are the Russian people being told?
Well, Russian people are being told that thanks to the brokerage by the Belarus president, Alexander Lukashenko, a negotiated solution between the head of the Wagner Group, Mr. Prigozhin, and the Kremlin, a negotiated solution has been reached. And according to this deal, Mr. Prigozhin with his troops will be waived from any criminal prosecution, and they will be allowed to leave to Belarus safely. Mr. Prigozhin himself claims that he was only 200 kilometers away from Moscow when he decided to make a U-turn. This decision will certainly save a lot of lives.
And how are the Russian media covering the story?
Well, it doesn't come as a surprise that an armed mutiny here in Russia is on the front pages of all newspapers, both here in the country and all over the world. Russian state-controlled media have this narrative that obviously condemns the attempt mutiny, and they're focusing on the damages caused by the Wagner troops. For example, local authorities in Rostov-on-Don are saying that some 10,000 square kilometers of roads have been damaged by Wagner tanks. And opposition media in Russia have a different, more extreme take, and they're saying that basically they're accusing Prigozhin of failing to keep his promise to make this regime change here in Russia. And well, unlike for some bloodthirsty commentators, I would say that most Russians are happy with this peaceful resolution, which could have honestly led to a new civil war here in Russia.
Well, Alexei, thank you very much for keeping us up to date. That's Alexei Vir, who's a journalist. He's there in Red Square in Moscow. Thank you very much. Right, so let's time to get the thoughts of my panel on the storyline. Former Labour editor, Labourist Peter Edwards, and also former Brexit Party MEP Ben Habib. We'll start with you, Peter. Did you think that we went overboard, you know?
No, I don't think the Western media did, from what I've seen. The key thing from the events of the last week or so is the facade has cracked. So Putin's been in an office for about 23 years, and he had 4 years of not being president, but he really had a patsy, Dmitry Medvedev, to fill the role for him. He's a war criminal, and he's a very evil man. And since, I mean, he did lots of things that are wicked before Ukraine, but since he stepped that up with the invasion of Ukraine just over a year ago, there's always been this question about what would the end look like for Putin. Would he die of natural causes? There have been rumours he had cancer. We've no idea if that's true or not. Would he be assassinated? Seems incredibly unlikely, despite his record of assassinating opponents. Clearly, he'll never go and retire and live in his dacha. And now, because he's wanted internationally, it'd be very hard, although, as I understand it, not impossible for him to flee, because otherwise he could end up at The Hague for war crimes. So the facade has cracked because there was this uneasy peace, and I don't know if that's quite the right phrase, but there was an uneasy settlement in Russia with Putin kept going. The events of the last week, we remember a private military leader who owed all his position and money to political patronage from the Kremlin, basically changed sides, having been involved in prosecuting a bloodthirsty war in Ukraine. Yevgeny Prigozhin, it's a difficult name to say, but Yevgeny Prigozhin then changed his mind, turned on Putin, led a private army through the streets of Russia. So I don't think we're ever in the realms of having a coup this week. It wasn't going to get that far, but because Putin's going to dig in. But I think the facade has cracked, and I think it matters to the West because of the evil acts in Ukraine, but because Russia's a nuclear power.
Some people might say that Tony Blair's a war criminal, but what do you think, Ben Habib?
I agree. I think Tony Blair is a war criminal.
Would say that. Some people, of course, Tony's not here to defend himself, but he did, he did go into Iraq.
Yeah, he did, and we're living with the consequences even now. What a brave man Alexei is, going to the Red Square and transmitting that. What was interesting to me from his transmission was that they're getting the same story, pretty much, as what we're getting here. So the idea that there might be some kind of, propaganda going on in Russia isn't correct. And if Lukashenko is being put out as the guy who's brokered this deal, obviously his star is going to be rising quite dramatically in that sphere of influence, because he's now acted in order to de-escalate a problem in Russia. So we might see more from Lukashenko in the future. I'm not convinced we've seen the last of Putin. Clearly this was an attack on his authority. Prima facie it was an attack on his authority, unless it was some kind of false flag operation in order to get Wagner Group into Belarus, and they're going to attack from the north. Remember, Wagner Group has acted hand in glove with Putin for the last 24 years. It's been its covert operations abroad, effectively, ever since Afghanistan. With the exception of Georgia, we haven't seen Russian military acting internationally. It's been through the Wagner Group. So they are very close. I suspect what we saw was what took place, that it wasn't a false flag operation, and I suspect we're going to see quite a knee-jerk reaction from Putin in the next few weeks. And it'll be what Putin does, I think, over the next few weeks, which will determine whether or not confidence and people's belief in Putin ebbs away, or whether he can grip it back.
Well, then we have the situation where, of course, Vladimir Putin is a strong aggressor in a sense, because he's gone into Ukraine in that way. But then what could follow could be worse. So, for example, if Prigozhin did manage to overthrow him in some respect, that would probably be worse.
It would be disaster. It would be disaster. And this is the issue. Be very careful what you wish for. We all were keen to get rid of Saddam Hussein, but look at the mess that Iraq has become since Saddam and Libya. Libya is a failed state. Iraq is a failed state. Afghanistan was always a failed state, but we didn't add anything to the sum total of their... so we've got to be really careful what we do.
Be careful what you wish for. Well, what are your thoughts on that? Did the media was it a bit overkill on the whole Russia situation? situation. Get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.com, and we'll read your messages throughout the show. If you just tuned in, welcome on board. It's Head to Head. I'm Nana Akua. It's coming up to 16 minutes after 3 o'clock, and we are live. Joining me, Ben Habib and also Peter Edwards. But this story got me, because when I looked and I realised that Keir Starmer, he's hinted that he will elevate former Prime Minister Tony Blair, we mentioned him earlier. A lot of people call him a war criminal, others would say that he isn't. And Gordon Brown to the House of Lords. Well, didn't he raid the pensions? If the Labour leader wins the next general election. Now, the Labour leader said that he would, of course, want to speak to his predecessors about the transition from opposition to government, and his party had made no secret of its plans to stack Parliament's upper chamber with more Labour peers to help pass legislation. And that is despite pledging to abolish the House of Lords in his first term in government. So where's this rank hypocrisy from the Labour Party? And start with you, Ben Habib. He says he's going to abolish it, and then he's ready to place people like Gordon Brown and Tony Blair in there.
It's rank hypocrisy. He knows that the House of Lords is extremely unpopular now, generally, amongst the electorate. The cronyism and the methods by which, you know, people are elevated. I'm not saying all peerages, by the way, granted in that way, but you know, there's a really strong whiff now about the House of Lords, and I think it's going to be very hard to shift it. I suspect Gordon Brown would accept a peerage. I'd be very surprised if Tony Blair does.
Of course he'll accept it.
And I'll tell you why. Well, I'll tell you why, Nana, I don't think he will.
Won't he, except Tony Blair will accept it.
I tell you why he might not, and it's because he's making so much money outside the Lords. And, of course, if you become a peer, you then become subject to all the same scrutiny that Boris Johnson was scrutinised. You know, the Privileges Committee, you have to make disclosure about where you're making your money and how you're making it, from whom you're getting it. And Blair, I suspect, is making a lot more money from a lot more areas than he'd like us to know. So I'd be surprised. I find it abominable that he was given the highest order of knighthood of the Garter after his time in office, given what he did to the country and the world while he was in office.
Peter?
Well, I disagree with most of that. First of all, I don't think Tony Blair was a war criminal, but clearly I think the invasion of Iraq was a disaster. But let's not spend half an hour on that now. In terms of the Lord's story, I think, who knows what will happen, but you have to bear in mind, so Labour are ahead in the opinion polls. Labour could be the next government, but they're not taking that for granted. But then they'll run up, as many new governments do, against the number of Tory and crossbench peers. It would make it very difficult to get certain bits of legislation through Parliament, other than any that are explicitly stated in the manifesto, which the Lords will be duty-bound to support. So every Prime Minister of a new government tends to ennoble their own parties, so that's normal. And every former Prime Minister tends to be offered a peerage as well, so that's also normal. I actually think Gordon Brown, who I think was a fantastic Chancellor, but he lived a kind of famously ascetic life. The one thing where we could disagree, or you might disagree, with Gordon Brown on some of the politics, no one's ever accused him of being in it for status or money. He lived quite an ascetic life and continues to do so. So I'm not sure he'd take up a peerage.
Do you remember that bigoted woman phrase that he made when he didn't realise the mic was up?
And he apologised, and we all make mistakes, nothing wrong with apologising. But that's a bit of a cheap shot. And then on Tony Blair's point...
It's not a cheap shot, it's the truth. I'm just reminding you, because you were saying how great he is. I just remembered that.
We all make mistakes, and I think it's good to apologise. But Ben Habib made a point about Tony Blair. So Tony Blair did make a lot of money, that's undoubted, but he's largely wound down the business enterprises and put the money into the Tony Blair Institute. So, yes, he did make a lot of money. We don't know how much, but I don't think the disclosure should be a problem now, because he's funnelled most of his wealth into the kind of think tank charitable enterprises.
Funnelled, I like the word funnelled. He's funnelled his wealth into the think tank, so that's all good.
Yeah, I mean, I agree largely with what Peter said about Gordon Brown. I think he was a lousy Chancellor, but he did what he did because he believed in it. Tony Blair, on the other hand, he sold gold at the bottom. And remember, when that government left office, the country was effectively bankrupt. You know, government debt had reached astronomical levels as it was then, and if it hadn't been for the printing of money and the bailing out of banks and the very people who created the credit crunch, we would have gone bust in 2008. And in many ways, the ills that we're now experiencing in our economy can be traced back to the breaking of capitalism back in 2008. And that was all under light touch, light touch regulation of the banks by Gordon Brown. He used to say it, light touch regulation, that's what they said.
Well, remember Liam Burns' nice little note that I'm afraid there's no money left. That's how they left it, didn't it?
If you're going to debate the events of 15 years ago, there was a global financial crisis. the Labour government did not bring down Lehman Brothers, which was, if you like, the canary in the coal mine. And because we know COVID was devastating. That generated a global health and financial crisis. And people on the right didn't like this phrase, global crisis, in 2008.
Well,
but then we've had another global crisis, and people have to accept that it existed.
No, because, but listen, politicians can't absolve themselves of all responsibility when something outside affects our internal politics. They have to take responsibility for the decisions they're made based on the things that are happening. And I think in politics, a lot of that goes on when they messed up quantitating easing. There was too much money coming in.
And I'm afraid...
But that's not a government decision. Sorry, QE is a Bank of England decision.
Yes, but they're all working together.
Come on, Peter. QE took place hand in glove. Government, Bank of England, they talk about the independence of the Bank of England. Every pound of government debt that was issued in the great financial crash, or whatever they call it, was bought by the Bank of England. And you talk about it as being a global crash. It was a global crash created largely by the United Kingdom and the US. So you can't wash Gordon Hand's hands of this. Of course it was global, because we are a significant contributor to the global economy and the global financial system. What the UK does matters, and Gordon Brown was at the centre of the creation of those problems. They have to take responsibility for it. And they broke capitalism. That's what happened in 2008.
This phrase, broke capitalism, is close to meaningless. And Ben...
No, it's not meaningless. Peter, it's not meaningless.
Calm and reasonable, but I can see he's getting very exercised and upset about this.
I'm not.
There was a...
It's a fact.
Well, Ben, it's the first time I've heard you shout at me. You're always very calm and friendly.
No, I wasn't shouting. Sorry.
OK,
he
wasn't shouting.
No problem.
Yeah.
No problem.
He wasn't shouting.
There was a global financial crisis. If you read Gordon Brown's book, I think him and Balls accept banking regulation in Britain should have been tighter. But we are where we are. Should Britain have bailed out the banks, or should Britain have let NatWest and RBS shut down? The consequences of that would have been a disaster if RBS had closed.
It's not really worked out well.
He kept the British economy going.
Well, it's not worked out well, and that's what I say.
Well, what do you mean by that? It's not worked out well.
Well, it hasn't, has it? Look where we are now, and the banks seem to be taking advantage of the situation once again. When interest rates are going up, they're not passing it on to the savers, but we will talk about that.
That's nothing to do with the bailout, though, is it?
That is on the way. Well, you're talking about the banks, so I'm coming in and talking about that. But that's what's on the way. Stay tuned. Loads more to come. If you just tuned in, joining me, Ben Habib, and also Peter Edwards. On the way, St Paul's Cathedral dubbed Britain's wartime leader Winston Churchill a white supremacist and unashamed imperialist. But have they gone too far? But next, it's been 7 years since the Brexit referendum, but the country still remains deeply divided. So has the economic crisis proven that it was the wrong decision?
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive, because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, it's 26 minutes after 3 o'clock. This is GB News. We are the People's Channel. I'm Nana Akua. Now, before the break, we were discussing the end of the Wagner's group insurrection in Russia. Let's have a quick look at what you've been saying. Shirley says this was no insurrection. It was planned to make the Russian people believe that Putin has total control and power and is winning the war. Can you honestly see Putin granting an amnesty to the leaders of the Wagner group? I'm with you. He's not. Seriously, you must... If this is serious, then he's dead meat, because Putin, I can't imagine that he would allow this guy to carry on living. Anna says, I think putting the Wagner group's leader in Belarus is just the latest ruse from Putin. They'll probably attack Kyiv from there. Alan says, has anyone thought that the last 24 to 36 hours have been an attempt to deceive? Surely the Wagner forces are going to come down into Ukraine from Belarus. Yes, interesting. And actually, yesterday, we should have really been talking about the armed forces, our own armed forces, because, of course, it was Armed Forces Day, but hey-ho. Well, listen, on Friday, Britain marked 7 years since voting to leave the EU. However, despite 7 years having passed since the historic vote, the country still remains deeply divided over Brexit. Now, many people pinning the blame of Britain's current economic woes on its exit from the EU, whereas others say a combination of the pandemic and Russia's invasion of Ukraine are the real culprits. But is the UK better off since leaving the EU? I'm going to start with you, Peter Edwards.
No, and I know this show's about opinions, but there are some things that are just facts. The Independent Office for Budget Responsibility said the economy is 4% smaller than it would otherwise have been because of Brexit. And now, the people who supported Brexit, I have no problem with. You know, there was a vote. There was a vote, and Remain has lost. But there seemed to be a split into two tribes. One group of Brexiteers saying Brexit's been a success, everything is going fine, our best days ahead of us. And then there's another group of people who still support leave, but say it's not been done properly. And what we need is more Brexit, not a watered-down Brexit. And Brexit's never been tried, and let's do it properly. And there's a great irony to me there, because that was the defence used by Leninists and Trotskyists to say, oh, people say communism didn't work, it's only because we haven't done it properly. To me, Brexit's been a failure, but it's happened. And we just have to make the best of it and grow from where we are. But the economy is smaller.
OK, well, a lot of people don't necessarily judge better off by just money, but...
well, I mean, that's utter tripe. I'm afraid Peter accused me of shouting him in the first half of this programme. I may yet shout at him. That was... The OBR came out with that prediction, by the way, a prediction on which they put no time limit. Back in 2021, when we were still basically locked down, they said, as a result of Brexit, the economy would shrink by 4%. No one knows when that 4% shrinkage was due to take place. But on the single most important parameter, which is the trade between the United Kingdom and Europe, actually in 2022, which is the first full year of trade unaffected by lockdown since we left the EU, trade with Europe was up 13%. 13% increase in British exports to the EU and a similar increase in imports. As a result, we ran exactly the same deficit that we pretty much always run with the EU before we exited. It made not a darn bit of difference to trade. And some of that increase may have been inflation, but the complexion of the trade was the same as before we left the EU. So the notion that our economy is going to shrink as a result of Brexit is a false one. But What we haven't done as a country is take advantage of all the opportunities Brexit would have given us. If we'd done that, we wouldn't have the trade deficit with the EU that we still have. If we'd actually properly broken those apron strings, instead of tying ourselves in knots over a trade and cooperation agreement that establishes a level playing field on state aid, competition, employment and, crucially, environmental laws, where we've hamstrung with regulations and extra costs in the UK, if we hadn't done that, we'd be able to deregulate, we'd be able to cut taxes, we'd be able to make the United Kingdom an independent, nimble, trading country, which is where its history and heritage is, and which is where we need to return. We need to promote British interests ahead of international ones. And I'm afraid Brexit hasn't been done properly, and we know that because Northern Ireland...
I was just about to ask you, what about Northern Ireland?
Because Northern Ireland, which is part of the United Kingdom, has been left behind. Until Northern Ireland is reunited with Great Britain, no one can claim Brexit's been done.
But that's the problem, isn't it? How are they going to do that?
It's easy as pie, Nana. What we need is political will to tell those who would threaten the United Kingdom with violence if we don't put the border where it should be, which is between the Republic and Northern Ireland, which is where the Good Friday Agreement recognises the border to be, where every international institution recognises the border to be. If we don't have the courage to put customs controls there, which is where they should be, then of course we can't get over this. But all it requires is a bit of political will in our leaders.
But are you saying a physical border between Southern and Northern Ireland?
No, it has to be no more physical than the border between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, which seems to be acceptable to our political class. So why can't we do the same legitimately on the island of Ireland?
Peter?
Well, if it was that easy, I've got great...
It is that easy. It is that easy.
He said it's easy.
Chill out.
No, don't do that.
If it was that easy, then... why would it have kind of shuffled beyond the grasp of the 5 prime ministers we've had?
Well, you haven't answered the question. You're answering it with a question, so give a bit more than that.
I don't think it is that easy. I completely accept it's an incredibly knotty problem. I think people in Northern Ireland are suffering economically as a result. From what I've read, and just bits and bobs from think tanks, it seems to be, if there's any way we can make trade... mainland to Northern Ireland, then Northern Ireland to EU easier and harmonised. It seems like it's going to be technological solutions, because a classic complaint, you've had it on your show from small businesses, is I used to have 10 forms, now I have 100 forms for whatever I'm selling into Northern Ireland.
Well, let's hope they can get on with it, and if there is political will and there's those forces that seem to be trying to scupper Brexit at every turn, if only they would just stop them, perhaps we'd get something done. But what are your thoughts? gbviews@gbnews.com or tweet me at GBNews. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. On the way, Chancellor Jeremy Hunt is calling on banks to raise interest rates for savers. Now, do you think this is going to help solve the economic crisis? Is it a little bit too little, too late? But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Hello, it's 3:33. Aaron Armstrong here in the GB newsroom. We will start with some breaking news. Humberside Police has confirmed a 15-year-old girl has died after being pulled from the sea at Cleethorpes Beach in north-east Lincolnshire. Police say a boy who was also recovered from the water was taken to hospital but has since been discharged. More on that when we get it. Another piece of breaking news, though, in the last half hour or so. A 5-year-old boy has died after falling from a harbour wall in Padstow, the seaside town in Cornwall. The child was airlifted to hospital following the incident yesterday afternoon, but has sadly died. Devon and Cornwall police say they are treating the boy's death as an accident. Now, Russia's president says he's every confidence in his troops who are on the front line. That's in their continued war in Ukraine. It's after the leader of the Wagner mercenary group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, is set to head to Belarus. Last night, he pulled his troops out to avoid bloodshed as they headed for Moscow in what's being described as an attempted coup. They were on their way to remove Russian commanders that Prigozhin blames for mishandling the war in Ukraine. The Prime Minister set out what he's calling the biggest workforce training expansion of the NHS. Writing in the Sunday Times, Rishi Sunak says his NHS long-term workforce plan will aim to train, retain and reform the UK's experienced NHS staff. He says, as a country, we rely on attracting talented people from overseas rather than recruiting at home. Mr Sunak's described the plan as the cornerstone of his government's vision for a better healthcare system. And our website will have more on all of those stories. Just visit gbnews.com. Now it's back to Nana.
Thank you, Aaron. Now, there's still plenty to come this hour. Of course, we're going head-to-head with Peter Edwards and Ben Habib. And on the way, was Winston Churchill a white supremacist, an unashamed imperialist? Those are the exact words used by St Paul's Cathedral to describe Britain's wartime leader. Before that, the Chancellor is calling on banks to raise interest rates for savers. Is this too little, too late? That's on the way.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
The Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Good afternoon, welcome on board. If you just tuned in, where have you been? It's coming up to 39 minutes after 4 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua, going head-to-head live in the studio with me, Peter Edwards and also Ben Habib. And now lots of you have been getting in touch with your views at gbnews.com and tweeting us as well. Let's see, on the Wagner Group insurrection, Mark says, don't be fooled by Putin's games. He's banished Prigozhin and his troops to Belarus push to get them to regroup and attack Ukraine from the north. On the prospect of Blair and Brown getting peerages, Tony says Gordon Brown is the man who bankrupted the country and destroyed the private pension industry. Yeah, I second that. He shouldn't be getting a peerage. And on Brexit, Mark says Brexit was an opportunity to make Britain the leader of the Western world. We could have exploited more oil and gas, built up the military, lowered taxes, refreshed industries, created more entrepreneurs and controlled our borders. Failed on all of those. It's failed due to the political class and the civil service. I would agree with you. Right, well, let's move on, because this is an interesting story, because Jeremy Hunt has actually called on banks to raise interest rates for savers in order to offset the financial pain that many are feeling as a result of the rising mortgage bills. Now, the Chancellor has said that he made it clear to banking bosses that savers need to be getting a fair deal when he met them on Friday. Of course, this is after he put forward his plan. You'd expect him to come up with that before that, and that should be part of the plan. And many people are rightly frustrated that interest on their savings is not rising as fast as the interest on their mortgage payments. So could this be the saving grace that many of us need right now? Right, so to discuss, let's go straight to my head-to-headers. I'm going to start with you, Benedict, because you're a man of the money. You know a lot about it. OK, so what did you make of the hike in the interest rates, first of all, by the Bank of England?
I mean, two comments to make. The first is that raising interest rates isn't going to really have a direct impact on the kind of inflation we've got. What we've got is supply-side inflation created by lockdowns. When we locked the economy down, we broke supply chains, we broke the labour market. When we unlocked, the demand that naturally came back into the economy couldn't be accommodated by the supply side. When you raise interest rates, what you do is dampen demand. You don't assist on the supply side. And I think a lot of the reasons we've raised interest rates is not really to control inflation coming from supply side broken labour markets and supply chains. We're doing it to keep in touch with US interest rates, because as the Fed raises rates, if we don't raise rates, we'll see pound collapse, and that would be a real problem for inflation. So I think a lot of what we're doing is a response to that. But of course, if you do want to dampen demand in the economy as interest rates go up, you have to increase deposit rates. Because what you want people to do is to stop spending, stop borrowing.
So you mean saving rates when you say deposits?
Yes, yeah, saving rates. You've got to increase the rates payable on savings, because you want to encourage people to stop spending, stop borrowing, stop spending, and to deposit their money instead in banks, so that you take heat out of the economy. And if you don't raise deposit rates, you're only moving with one arm in your monetary policy. And what's really interesting to me as well is that these interest rate increases are not being transmitted into the economy at the speed which historically they would have been done. And that's because people are mostly fixing their interest rates on their mortgages. So these interest rate rises that the Bank of England is absolutely committed to, I think it's done 14 interest rate rises in the last year, we haven't felt their full effect, and people aren't going to feel their full effect until their mortgage fixed interest rates come up.
So it doesn't really work, because it's a stagnatory effect, isn't it? So maybe 5% of people who have mortgages will feel the effect, so the remainder won't, and then a couple of years, another 5%.
And I think by the time they feel it...
I think by the time it's going to be back down to...
Well, I think by the time they feel it, he would have killed the economy, because I fear what he's doing is going to create a real recession. Jeremy Hunt seems to welcome it. He said, I welcome a recession if that comes
What's wrong with him?
I mean, absolutely...
Well, that's because he's rich.
Absolute lunatic comment. But I fear we're going to end up in a recession, and I think if we're not careful, people will then, once their fixed interest rates expire, default on their mortgages, and we could create a banking problem. I think we're in a very difficult position. The Bank of England, I think it was very slow to raise rates. I think it's over-raising them now. We need a new formula. And actually, that new formula, I'm afraid, as much as people don't like hearing it, involves cutting taxes, raising the tax threshold for those who are on the lowest earnings, and actually getting more money into people's pockets.
Well, isn't it like giving someone the same medicine for 13 years? It's still not working. You give them a bit more. Peter?
Well, the medicine's been changed, I think, as Ben's comments alluded to, because although Ben and I probably have totally different perspectives on the economy and how it should be run, we kind of ended up in the same place, which is the Chancellor looks relatively impotent at this point in time. And the Bank of England, which has an inflation target of 2%, has been very slow to act when inflation at one point hit 10 or 11%. So, I mean, the Bank of England is on a very sticky wicket, but when they've raised rates 13 or 14 times in a row, that shows really that they're rushing from 0 to 60, and now the lingo is tightening. They're going to carry on tightening all the way until Britain goes into recession, it seems. I think it's daft to suggest that Jeremy Hunt is relaxed about a recession because he's wealthy. He is wealthy.
No,
I would also say
that's part of the reason why.
I would also.
He's not going to feel it, is he? He's not going to feel it like the normal person on the street.
He actually said a recession may be necessary, and that's fine.
Well, I think we may well end up with a recession, and I would.
I think it is because he's wealthy that he's saying that.
Hold on.
I do think that, actually. I'm just challenging the point. You've disclosed my point and saying that, no, I think he's saying that because he's wealthy, because he's not going to feel it, so it's easy for him to say that. He doesn't really understand.
I would disagree with Jeremy Hunt on all sorts of things, and I think he really undermined the NHS when he was Health Secretary. But I don't think people like Jeremy Hunt, I don't think really almost anyone in the House of Commons goes into politics other than because they want to help the country in some way or another. And everyone gets seduced by power. Power is very seductive, but I wouldn't personalise it that much, even though I think history is probably not going to judge Jeremy Hunt kindly. But that kind of brings us back to where we started. It feels like the government, the Chancellor, are fairly impotent because they're doing all these measures, and I think as well as Rishi Sunak's 5 pledges, which cover all areas of society, there was a few more pledges last week about mortgages. But it's all too late.
Well, it is way too late because not everybody, they're not going to feel the benefit of this so-called increase of interest rates because the people who are going to be paying them, a lot of them on fixed-rate mortgages. I mean, thankfully, I fixed a mortgage for about 5 years, only last year, so that gives me at least 4 years.
Thank goodness.
So hopefully, hopefully it will. I know somebody who fixed a rate at something like 2%, 2.5% or something for 10 years. So I think that their methods that they're using they're old-school tactics.
And it feels fight a new problem.
It's a new problem. They need to work out better ways of doing
this. What we
silly...
fundamentally need, Nana, and Liz Truss had it right, for all the defenestration that the Bank of England and others imposed on her short time in office, she had it right. She understood we've got to grow the economy. The only way out of this is growth, and the only way you get growth is by deregulating and cutting taxes. That's the only way we can do it.
Well, Peter, what do you think a Labour government are planning to do on this? Because Keir Starmer said a lot of things and gone back on a lot of things, but what's the Labour plan on this?
Well, Labour have been calling for changes. I think they had a 5-point plan, but of course we're talking about action now, not after a general election. So,
but what is their plan?
So they wanted, from memory, a halt on repossessions. They wanted greater flexibility for mortgage holders. So if you hit personal household difficulty, you can switch between products. And they want more advice as well, because it's become a bit of an adage of the last couple of years, but we're in this generation of ultra-low interest rates. There might be people perhaps under the age of 35 who are borrowers and have always known rates around 0 to 1 or 2%, not the rates we're talking about now. So I think the advice part of it was very important as well. And I think to go back to what Jeremy Hunt announced last week, which was kind of similar, it wasn't that he announced things and the left thought they were wrong or outrageous. It was that he announced things and they may not really have much of an impact because they were priced in, or there's a time lag, or there were things that banks have been pushed to already. And the point you kicked off on, which is about when the Bank of England has raised what's called the base rate, and is that passed on to savers, Jeremy Hunt's not proposing to do anything about that, just like the government isn't doing anything about food inflation. They just said, please, can you pass it on? Well, please, CEOs. They're not passing the law. They're talking about it to create the false perception of action, just like they talked about having caps on food prices, which really would be Soviet, and then backed out from that. So Jeremy Hunt is
similar to what, during the banking crash, a similar thing happened there.
There was no price caps. That really would be the 70s.
But the fact is the Labour Party didn't do a very good job of talking to the banks and making sure that before they were given all these benefits and bailed out by the taxpayer, that they had some other things for us here.
Briefly, may I say, that very briefly, they prevented a recession turning into a depression, and that is how I would defend Gordon Brown.
I don't agree with that at all. I don't think they did that at all. I think that what they did was leave us, the taxpayer, to pick up the tab for the banks, who are now punishing us once again. But let's see what your thoughts are. Keep them coming. gbnews@gbnews.com, or tweet me at GBNews. It's just coming up to 49 minutes after 3 o'clock. I've got my monologue on the way, which we'll be talking about immigration. But the final subject for this head-to-head is all with regard to the family of Winston Churchill, who've expressed anger after St Paul's Cathedral described Britain's wartime leader as a white supremacist and unashamed imperialist. Now, Now, the slanderous description of a man who has been voted as the greatest Briton of all time on more than one occasion reportedly stayed on the cathedral's website for over a year and was only taken down following a complaint from a member of the Friends of St Paul's. Now, Churchill's grandson, Sir Nicholas Soames, bastarded the description as deeply offensive, thoughtless and stupid and ignorant, pointing out that his grandfather had saved England by leading the country's fight against Hitler. So is it fair to describe Winston Churchill as a white supremacist? Peter Edwards.
I would not at all call him a white supremacist. I would try and defend St Paul's for trying to be modern and inclusive, but I don't think they've got it right. And it really, and I've worshipped St Paul's and I think they do a lot of fantastic things, but they haven't got this right. And I think there's a problem in trying to impose the values of now on someone who came to political prominence around 100 years ago and was a soldier before that, more than 100 years ago. Churchill is a national hero, but that doesn't stop us from having a nuanced and balanced debate about what he got right and what he got wrong. And it's clear that if you look at some of his writings, he would use language about people who aren't white that would be unacceptable today. But that was language that was not unique to Churchill. It reflected the language of the 1920s that we wouldn't touch today.
I think white supremacy is a bit of a... it's an offence. It's deeply offensive, isn't it? Really? He did good things as well. You can't just hold on the bad.
It's deeply offensive and it's designed to undermine our belief in Churchill. There's been a sustained attack on British people and their heritage and the values we hold. And that sustained attack is designed to undermine our self-confidence as a nation. And this attack on Churchill is part of it. Churchill was undoubtedly one of the greatest leaders the world has ever seen. He didn't just stand up for England, as Nicholas Soames said. He stood up for the world. The United Kingdom stood alone against the German aggressor when Russia was on Germany's side before the US joined the war. And arguably, the US wouldn't have joined the war if it hadn't been for Churchill's implorations of the US and his close relationship with the US. Churchill was undoubtedly the shoulders on which the freedom of this country was built, and all the freedom, frankly, that people like whoever wrote that website at St Paul's have in order to attack him. It was through his great leadership and what he gave this country that he is now being attacked. And I find it abhorrent. And he was white and he was supreme. And I will not allow people to denigrate Churchill's standing in the country. And apart from anything else, Nana, whatever Churchill was, I agree with Peter, he was a man for his time. And all people can only be judged by the values of their own time. And Churchill embodies, represents all things good in the United Kingdom, and I will not allow that to be challenged on my watch to the extent that I'm able to challenge, fight it. I will fight it.
And also, what is a church doing calling people names like that?
I know, it's not their place. It's not the church's place.
It's not their place to be calling someone a white supremacist or anything. I mean, Peter, you sort of alluded to it, that they were trying to be modern about it, so using that terminology. But language like that is quite incendiary, and that's not what we expect from our church, really.
Language matters and language is political, as this discussion shows. So I would defend St Paul's, but I think Churchill was an imperialist. That's a fact. But one thing we can agree on, calling him a white supremacist with images of, to be frank, redneck Americans waving Confederate flags is completely inappropriate. Totally Churchill was a product of his time. He was part of empire. He was an imperialist, but clearly St Paul's didn't get it right by calling him a white supremacist. But, we're all humans. They've accepted it's a mistake, and as I understand it, they've now made changes to the website as well.
I was just reading a tweet here, a little message here. Diane says, "Dear Nana, I like your programme, but I'm afraid, my dear, you do not suit that blonde hair. It looks much nicer, all black. Thanks." I was thinking about that, actually. It's because it's summer, that's why I've changed it. It's just as I was looking, I suddenly thought...
Oh, mine's greyer this week.
Mine's blonde.
Yes. Well, let's have a look, because some of you have been getting in touch. Daniel Hodge says, imperialism, globalism, what of the Ottoman Empire, the Australian Hungary Empire, as well as the British Empire? Context, look at the times. I'm not quite sure where we're going with that one. I'll try to understand it, but I think it's too clever for me, sorry. Paul has said, if historically we look back and class all whites as racists, will we look back in the future and class all Muslims as terrorists and things like that? You can't keep kind of doing... Yeah, I mean, that was...
That's a baffling comment.
That was a baffling comment, but thank you for that. This one's from DD, said it's disgusting defamatory remarks about our hero war leader. And then he's mentioned... Yeah, so this is the thing that people are coming in and talking about, this easy way to fix the banks. The banks will do nothing to help despite being bailed out and making billions from our money and not passing interest back on savings. If everyone that banks at a certain bank threatens to withdraw their savings, thus creating a Northern Rock situation, God, I remember that. I had a mortgage with Northern Rock. What would they do? I think that's an easy fix. Help us as we have helped you. Take a smaller bonus for once. It's true as well, and the governor of the Bank of England on his 565,000 or whatever it is, he can't even remember how much he's earning, which is quite embarrassing. Let's see. Denise on Churchill is disgusting defamatory remarks. Another one who's not happy with that. Andy says Churchill is one of the greatest heroes of the world. It's only lefty woke idiots who have nothing better to do. The church is not the best place to be discussing that sort of thing. Let's see. Alfie on Savers says, Nana, why didn't your guests and yourself stick to the question about savers? Yeah, why didn't we? Let's come back to that very briefly.
I thought I answered that. I mean,
yeah, but why do they not pass in the savings rate?
Well, I think it's completely wrong. And it undermines the whole principle of raising interest rates, because you need both arms of the lever to be doing the same thing, to take money out of circulation. That's how you dampen inflation.
What do you think with regard to savings? Just so we answer this question properly for Alfie.
Well, where banks haven't passed on rate rises to savers is because they want to make more money. It's as simple as that.
It's greedy, isn't it, really, frankly?
I wouldn't use that word in all cases. I think it depends on a bank-to-bank basis. But if a bank is already highly profitable and then it fails to pass on a rate, it's very much open to the accusation of greed. But banks, and remember, some of the large building societies that are like a bank, they've got very different levels of performance.
It's almost an antitrust issue, I think. The fact that all of them aren't passing it on suggests to me that we need an investigation into how it is that this isn't happening.
Well, we helped them out, so I think that they should at least pass that on. But let's see more of your thoughts. Rob says raising interest rates for savers... Alfie, I hope that helps, by the way. Raising interest rates for savers will only help the boomer generation that actually has savings. It's not going to help millennials with mortgages. Ian says raising interest rates on savings won't help the poor at all, but Jeremy, Rishi and their cronies will make fortunes. And says, I suspect the views held by Churchill were held by the majority of people in the 1900s. To judge people by our present ideas is crazy. Well, listen, interestingly enough, keep your thoughts coming on the way. I'll be talking immigration. I've got a monologue on the way. Ben Habib and Peter Edwards, you will stay for at least half an hour, won't you? They will stay. Right, this is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. There's loads more to come in the next hour. Don't go anywhere.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point, but boom!
And action.
Read my superstar panel. They're already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News. Britain's watching.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good afternoon and welcome to GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. Now for the next hour, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and of course it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. So joining me today, it's author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton, and also broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly. Before we get started, let's get your latest news headlines.
Good afternoon, it's 4 o'clock. Aaron Armstrong here in the GB newsroom. A 15-year-old girl has died after being pulled from the sea at Cleethorpes Beach in North East Lincolnshire. Police say a 15-year-old boy was also recovered from the water. He was taken to hospital and has since been discharged. Meanwhile, a 5-year-old boy has died after falling from a harbour wall in Padstow. The child was airlifted to hospital following the incident yesterday afternoon, but died later. Devon and Cornwall police say they are currently treating the boy's death as an accident. Now, Russia's President Vladimir Putin says he has every confidence in his troops on the front line. It follows the 24-hour armed rebellion, which was called off last night. Now, it's understood the leader of the Wagner mercenary group behind that coup is to leave Russia for Belarus following what's been described as an attempted overthrow. His troops were on their way to Moscow to remove Russian commanders. Yevgeny Prigozhin is blaming them for the mishandling of the war in Ukraine. Well, Ukrainian MP Oleksiy Goncharenko thinks Putin's time is running out.
Definitely, if this mutiny would continue several days longer, better several weeks longer, that will be the end of Russian army in Ukraine. It was too quick to exploit it for our army. It was just in 24 hours. So I don't think that now it will, in short term, will change something on the battlefield. But on the middle term, it showed how weak is Russia. And I'm even more sure today in Ukrainian victory than before.
The Prime Minister has set out what he's calling the biggest workforce training expansion in the NHS history. Writing in the Sunday Times, Mr Sunak says his NHS long-term workforce plan will aim to train, retain and reform the UK's experienced staff. He says, as a country, we rely on attracting talented people from overseas rather than recruiting at home. Mr Sunak described the 15-year plan as the cornerstone of his government's vision for a better healthcare system. The Chancellor says raising interest rates is one of the most effective methods to curb inflation. This week, rates were hiked again. They're up to 5% from 4.5%. It's the 13th rise in a row and the sharpest increase since February. The move means mortgage holders, homeowners, are preparing for a big jump in their monthly repayments. Writing in the Mail on Sunday, Jeremy Hunt has urged those struggling to be patient with the painful measures. Chief Secretary to the Treasury, John Glenn, told us the Chancellor's committed to supporting the Bank of England.
As you know, the Bank of England is independent of government. We work closely with them, but they make those decisions, and they've obviously increased our rates by 0.5% last week. I'm not here to commentate, I'm here to work closely with the Bank of England. People don't want us to be squabbling amongst ourselves. What we should be doing is having a committed and united plan to deal with high inflation in our economy. That is what we're doing in government, and that is what the Governor of the Bank of England is doing with the interest rate decisions.
A silent vigil has been held in London to mark the first anniversary of Zara Alina's death. The 35-year-old law graduate was sexually assaulted and killed as she walked home from a night out on the 26th of June last year. 29-year-old Jordan McSweeney is currently serving a life sentence after being jailed for at least 38 years. Earlier, friends and family of Ms Alina joined the vigil at Valentine's Park in Ilford, and the London Mayor Sadiq Khan, one of several officials in attendance.
If we know somebody acting inappropriately, we've got to call them out and have a word. It's not good enough. It may be banter to you, but it's not how it's received by women and girls. We've got to change the criminal justice system. One of the things about Zara's case is highlighted the consequences of austerity over the last 13, 14 years. But the final thing I'll say to you is this: we must not forget Zara. We must not forget Zara. And why today is important is it humanises a number. I said every 3 days a woman is killed at the hands of a man.
That's it for the moment. We'll be back just after 4:30. Now it is back to Nana.
Thank you, Aaron. Good afternoon. If you've just joined me, welcome on board. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. It's fast approaching 6 minutes after 4 o'clock. I'm Nana Akua. The immigration industry. Well, that's what I like to call it because that's what it is. I mean, I don't know about you, but I've had enough. I'm sick and tired of hearing yet another ridiculous way to house migrants when the real problem is in the processing by a Home Office who are that in name because so many of them are actually working from their homes. And we, the public, are paying for it. We're paying for all of it. Now, I'm not saying that we don't help people, but surely we can do better than this. The cost to house asylum seekers is on course to reach £11 billion a year. The Illegal Migration Bill, an unfortunate title. I mean, you think the so-called greatest minds this country has to offer would have perhaps renamed it. But then, nonetheless, the impact assessment from the bill warns that costs could exceed £30 million per day, and this is why. So, the other day, we heard that Braintree District Council lost their High Court battle for MDP Wethersfield, that's the RAF base there, in James Cleverly's constituency, to be turned into a migrant camp, and that it will now house over 1,000 fighting-aged men. Now, it's not clear as to whether they'll be allowed to leave the base, but either way, that is where they're going. Now, if you thought that was bad, well, get this. The Home Office are now outbidding councils for accommodation. So basically, they're offering private landlords a considerably higher rate of rent to house migrants than the councils can offer to house the people of this country. And it's leading to, as Kieran Williams, leader of Southwark Council, said of his homelessness staff, we have never seen anything like this. We have all but run out of options to find temporary accommodation in the borough. So instead of housing people who are already living in this country, we are prioritising those who have come here illegally and, in effect, exacerbating a homelessness pandemic. And the number of migrants being housed in private accommodation is now above 50,000, which is a 20-fold increase in less than 3 years. It's totally unsustainable. And if you thought about booking a nice hotel in a coastal town, you'll be lucky to find a room, as almost 400 are currently being used to house asylum seekers. That's 400 hotels. You couldn't make this up. Now, the Illegal Migration Bill basically gives ministers the powers to detain and remove migrants who arrive here illegally, either to their home country or to Rwanda. And this week, the Court of Appeal will rule whether the Rwanda plan is lawful. Anyone proposing and opposing this needs to take a long, hard think and come up with some alternatives because, frankly, I'm fed up of hearing liberal lefties talking about what a cruel place Rwanda is and how the rooms in a barge are too small and how all migrants who come here are vulnerable when there are many who are purely here for economic reasons and are bypassing those who come here legitimately. It's an industry, an immigration industry, a business where people smugglers and lawyers, employers who want cheap labour benefit, and those being exploited are the migrants themselves and the people of this country. But before we get stuck into the debate, here's what else is coming up today. For the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, do you believe that the West went overboard on the mutiny in Russia? Mutinous Russian mercenary fighters that headed towards Moscow turned back after skirting a deal with the Russian President Vladimir Putin. But with the UK's military shrinking and cuts in defence budget, should we be focusing on our own armed forces? Then at 4:50 as well, I'll be crossing live to the Kremlin to speak to Russian journalist Alexei Veer. According to sources, US officials were concerned about Russia's nuclear weapons during the mutiny and headed by Yevgeny Prigozhin. I'll be getting the latest from the heart of Moscow. Then at 5, it's this week's Outside. I've got a special mystery guest. She's an 80s pop icon who was #1 for a 5-week period in the UK charts. She's also famed for her fiery red hair. Can anyone guess who she might be? That's on the way in the next hour. Tell me what you think on everything we're discussing. Email gbviews@gbnews.com or tweet me at gbnews. Right, let's get started. Let's welcome again to my panel broadcaster and author Christine Hamilton and also broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly. Right, Danny, that's a bit of a moody face and then a smile.
Well, I caught my reflection
What was that about?
Realised that the camera was...
He's happy. How are you, Danny?
Very well, very well. It's a beautiful day out there. You two look fabulous.
Thank you.
Without a doubt. It's too warm for me. Bit too warm. Nice air conditioning today.
Beautiful in here.
Yeah.
Well, you got 2 blondes.
Yes, and that suits you, by the way.
But Denise didn't think it did. I think it was Denise.
What does Denise know, whoever
Thanks,
Denise is?
No.
Denise.
It was Denise. Yes, so Danny, what do you think then? This just seems every single plan is scuppered by a load of people who say, you can't do that, it's so cruel. You can't do this, you can't do that. They're literally forcing the situation and making it worse.
Yeah. Do you know what really annoys me is the fact that there's no middle ground. You mentioned lefty liberals. It's their complete reluctance to accept that out of these thousands of young men, a percentage, they won't even accept a percentage, are trying it on. They're economic migrants. My view is that the majority of these young lads are economic migrants. They'll be coached, they'll be trained. No wonder they get past our system and they're given settled status because they know exactly what to say. And I just wish some of these lefty liberals would accept that and say, OK, so if you oppose it, you're not a bigoted racist. You just have a grasp on reality. And £11 billion, was that a year? It's coming up to 11 billion in the future.
Yeah, if we carry on in the trajectory that we're going
swarm, OK, continues, it's 11 billion pounds.
30 million a day.
You have to put them somewhere, though, don't you? And unless you turn the boats round, unless the flights to Rwanda take off,
but what
you're
about
not going to stop
processing?
it.
But we were so busy focused on the end goal of housing them that we seem to have lost touch with the fact that the reason why there is this failure is because of the Home Office. The Home Office. Why is it taking them so long to process the migrants who are then stuck in these areas of accommodation for years? That is the problem, and I don't understand why we're so focused on trying to find a solution for housing people when actually a lot of the Home Office are working from home. And this is the problem. They're even outbidding councils when it comes to properties.
I know it's one side fighting against the other. Apparently, councils themselves have an agreement between them that they won't bid against each other, but the Home Office comes in over the top. And these hoteliers, in a way, who can blame them? If suddenly the Home Office comes along and says, we'll take your entire hotel, every single nook or cranny, for whatever, however much...
Over the odds.
A year, over the odds. You'd have to be, and, you know, with the economy crashing... not crashing, the economy rocky...
Jeremy Hunt wanted to, apparently. He wanted a recession.
People haven't got much money. People are going to stop... They're going to start cutting back on holidays. So no wonder hoteliers do that. Do you remember a few weeks ago, beginning of this year, there was the... down in Cornwall, the Tintagel Castle Hotel.
Yeah, beautiful hotel.
No, he said, I cannot do that to my staff, I can't do that to local residents, and I can't do that to all the people who've booked their holidays. But he is a lone voice. And,
because most of the staff get sacked because the events team who look after weddings and christenings and social occasions, well, they're not needed, so they get put on the door. What really annoys me as well is that, and let's go with the lefty liberals, what really annoys me is when they criticise somebody common sense minded who say, OK, put them on a barge, it's going to be safe, it's going to be clean, and they say it's inhumane. Put them in a Ministry of Defence site where soldiers or RAF personnel used to have to live. You can't put them there, it's not good enough. I mean, these are kids, these are young men who've been sleeping in tents in Calais for months or years. You put them up on a barge and that's not good enough. The whole thing is mental.
And also we're doing it from the wrong end. I mean, we're bailing out the boat with a calendar, whereas we're not stopping the hole in the hull that is causing the problem. So we're not stopping people coming in. We're just trying to bail out at the far. We will get completely overtaken by this.
But even
we have been already.
But even if you did, so just say you accepted the migration numbers are coming across like that as is, the real issue for me is the Home Office. It's the way they're behaving with this, the outbidding of other councils. By the way, that's our money. That's our money, by the way. The money that they're using to pay more than the councils, all of that is our money. So they're deciding, oh, well, we'll bid a bit more of their money. So they actually have no regard for our money. They're total disregard for it.
Well, this 30 billion is our
30 million
money,
a day.
isn't it? Yeah.
30 million a day.
That's just far too much. And it comes from a, it's not a left or a right issue, I don't think, because lots of working class Labour voters are fed up with it as well. So
they're more, but they've come around
because
to the
don't
right,
forget,
haven't they?
I'm a Scouser, and you go to the working class areas of Liverpool, which have been completely changed by this instant over a period of weeks or months. Mass immigration, the Scouse white working class areas are no longer Scouse or indeed white, and we have to accept that's not a racist thing to say.
No, it's
because
not.
there are
It's not
people
at all.
coming over the water with different belief systems, different approaches to lots of things.
But I will say what you're talking with the left and right. The left wing or the Labour element of politics no longer represents the working class, and I think the right wing, the more conservative element, represents more of the people in the working class.
Yeah,
I
think the Tories are more of a part of the working class.
Well, of course they do. I think
the people who really represent the working class are parties like UKIP and the parties over on the right. They really are. But to go back to what you were saying earlier, it annoys me intensely as well that lefties, for want of a better word, won't accept that any of these people are economic migrants.
That's correct.
It is
That's
pain
correct.
as a pike staff. Look at them. They come flooding off the boats. They're all young. They don't have wives and children.
Yeah.
They're young, economically viable men, and they will not accept that. And
Yeah.
as you say, if you point that out, you're accused of being racist and inhumane and
They don't like, look, the facts don't mess around with feelings. It's a fact that a lot of them are economic migrants. Fair enough, if that's how it's going to be, and we're not going to stop, as you said, plug the gap. But the bottom line is, I'm still looking at that Home Office and asking, what the hell are they doing? Because I think they processed 9 migrants in a week. I mean, it's like, what? How can you...
What they're doing is losing the Tories the next election. I mean, if they...
But it could be deliberate because it's obviously they're civil servants. They want to... I mean, the head of the PCS said, which is the Civil Servants Union, said that he actually wanted to see, use the whole strikes to bring down the government.
Yeah.
So the civil servants have got a lot to... But we are suffering as a result, and we're paying for it, all of it.
When does it stop? When does it end? How many is enough? And that's when you ask somebody who's a supporter, who wants an instant processing, get them over here, maybe process them in France and bring them over here legitimately. So when do you stop? There was 50 or 60,000 this year or last year. When do you stop? At what point do we stop and say enough is enough? And by the way, just one little point about multiculturalism. If multiculturalism is such a panacea and is so great, why are there areas... I live in the Midlands. There are areas in Birmingham that have the white folk have just abandoned them. Why would that be if multiculturalism is so good?
Well, listen, even Trevor Phillips...
There are enclaves of Pakistanis and Bangladeshis.
It'll only stop when our indigenous culture has been completely disappeared.
But the bottom line is, though, it doesn't work. I mean, Trevor Phillips said the multiculturalism doesn't work, and he actually, obviously, we were talking about the anniversary for the Windrush as well. People were talking about this, and
they assimilated.
Yeah, I think it's more about whether you assimilate to the environment that you're within,
belief systems,
and also your culture. So culturally, how do you behave? And I think that when in Rome do as the Romans, I think is fair enough, and I don't see there's no problem with sharing your culture as well and sharing spaces with people who are of different cultures and learning from each other and growing. And yes, it works, but unfortunately what's happened is, it's Indian people will go to one corner, then some black people will go to this corner, and it's created clumps and clusters of different races rather than a nice sort of mix, which is when I think the problems arise and lack of understanding. But that's exactly what's happening with this in terms of all of this immigration, because what you are going to end up with are pockets of people from one area, pockets of people from another. We've got somebody all of them in the RAF base here, then we've got all of them there. It's not going to work. They need to process them and assimilate them quickly so that they adapt to the environment
but
here.
none of this is going to go on year after year after year after year. When 30 years' time, it's going to be continuing. And at what point... I was listening to Tony Abbott on GB News this morning talking to Camilla, and he said, listen, the only thing he can do is start turning them boats back.
He's the Australian, isn't he? He's the one who set up the policy.
Sorry, forgive me, the former Australian Prime Minister.
Well, that is exactly what we should be doing. They solve the problem by just whizzing the boats around and pushing them off.
No, I think they put them on like a third-party island or something.
Yeah, sorry, I'm using that metaphor. Yes, they did.
But that could work and it should work. But remember, Australia, where they are, they have much more sea between them and where they're sending people to, and also it's much more of a perilous journey to come from wherever they're coming from to get to Australia, because Australia is quite isolated. But whereas we are, it's a short journey over the channel in a dinghy can make it, and even if it doesn't, we'll pick you up and bring you here. There's got to be a better way of doing this, and it's got to be a global effort, I think.
It stokes, in the areas where these immigrants go, it stokes enormous resentment from the local population, and that is not good for community cohesion.
No, don't buy that argument.
Understandably.
Don't buy that argument of supporters of mass immigration, unfettered immigration, that they're making this perilous, life-perilling journey across the Channel. They're not. Because 60,000 people made it last year and only a handful died. The odds are overwhelming, and that's a tragedy.
But we don't know that. But you say that. I mean, only recently a migrant boat sank and potentially 700 people...
That was in the Mediterranean. We're talking about the short journey across the Channel.
But what I'm saying is, when I get to the point, is that we don't know how many people died in that. And once again, we don't know how many boats didn't make it or how many people have died.
Well, I'm talking about the Channel. I'm not talking about from Libya to Italy.
No, I'm talking about the numbers. So you're talking... Yeah, I get it. It's a less perilous journey because it's shorter. What I'm saying is, even though 40,000 or how many made it, we don't know how many didn't make it, is what I'm saying.
Oh, no, we will know how many people have died.
No, we don't.
Of course we will.
How?
We will know if people, unfortunately, will be washed on the shores. We'll know if dinghies sink.
No, we won't know.
Oh, Nana, we will know if dinghies sink and people die.
You won't know how many.
Across the Channel.
No, you won't know.
So you think that dinghies may have gone down and we don't know about it?
People would have, of course.
Really?
Of course.
We would know about it.
I think we'd know about it.
The Channel is so small.
I think many people would have died that we don't know of. And not all of them may have taken dinghies, they may have taken some other way, but...
People use this argument that they're making such a perilous journey that they must be in desperate need of escaping whatever it is.
France. Of escaping France.
Precisely. Which is absolute rubbish.
I'd get on the dinghy.
That you said.
I don't know whether...
Perhaps you shouldn't.
It's not.
I don't know whether they'd want me on the dinghy.
It's not perilous.
It would turn into a speedboat if I was sitting at the back.
He's in.
But the odds are 10,000 to 1 you're going to make it. I'd get on the dinghy.
It is not a perilous journey.
It's not a perilous journey.
It might not be 10,000 to 1 if you're on it.
And
I would sink the dinghy. That's what the French should do, employ me. Another fat lad.
There should be like 20 of you waiting for the dinghy. You get in the dinghy as well. Can I come along as well?
I'll just pretend I'm from Syria or somewhere. I'll just get on the dinghy. It sinks.
And everyone can
within 2 feet of water. No one's going to drown.
That's an interesting point. Do you think it will work?
I'm going to hire myself out.
Right. Well, then hire out Danny in a dinghy.
Yes.
You're with me. I'm Nana Akua. This is GBNews on TV, online and on digital radio. Come on, let's get back. At 5 o'clock, it's This Week's Outside. My special mystery guest is an 80s pop icon. She was famed for her fiery blonde, red hair even. She's also rubbed shoulders with Princess Diana. Any more guesses? gbviews@gbnews.com. But before that, up next, it's time for the Great British Debate this hour, and I'm asking, is it time to focus on our own military? Send me your thoughts, email gbviews@gbnews.com and tweet me at GBNews. I've got a poll up right now asking, is it time to focus on our own military? Cast your vote now.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The people's channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel. Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon. It's coming up to 26 minutes after 4 o'clock. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News. We are the People's Channel. It's now time for the Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, is it time to focus on our own military? Now, yesterday, the media reacted frantically to the mutinous Russian mercenary fighters marching towards Moscow, presenting Vladimir Putin and with the most serious challenge on his power in the last sort of 23 years. And at the same time, thousands across the UK turned out to pay their respects, marking Armed Forces Day. But as cuts to our defence budget continue, I wonder whether the nation should be focusing on issues closer to home. Because earlier this week, Military Chief Sir Tim Radford warned Britain's shrinking armed forces are weakening its influence on NATO after the British Army announced a reduction of 3,000 serving troops. And it's easy to forget that one of the reasons we can stay safe in this country is because we have armed forces who are prepared to stand and defend when the need arises. So for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, is it time to focus on our own military? Right, so joining me now is former editor of the Labour list, Peter Edwards, international border expert Henry Bolton, Ben Habib, former Brexit MEP, and political commentator Danny Armstrong. All right, I'm going to start with you, Henry Bolton.
I think we've got to pay more attention to our defence. What happened yesterday is symptomatic of demonstrated, if you like, that Russia can turn on a sixpence politically. We didn't just see Prigozhin and his advance to Moscow. We saw Kadyrov, the Chechen leader, bringing troops up. We saw a partial agitation, I wouldn't say mobilisation, amongst certain other private military companies. And we saw a number of oligarchs getting involved as well. We've got the Belarusian angle too. What I'm saying is that there's a very, very good Russian phrase from a 1950s, I think, film, which is Vostok dziela tonka, which is the East is, if you like, doesn't translate totally, but a delicate thing. It's something that you have to treat very carefully because it is both volatile and unpredictable. And Russia is a very dangerous place. Now, just to put it into perspective...
OK, that's great. But Henry, what about our own military, though? Because we're in this now. And we're not
that's the
focusing on
context.
ourselves.
That's part of the context, Nana,
Well,
and
if
you
you
can't
get to
take the
that-
context away. But if you look at our armed forces now, we see tank battles going on in eastern Ukraine, but we've got 227 Challenger 2 tanks in the British Army. Only 157 of them are operational. That number will go down to 143 when they're upgraded. Our troops were at 102,000 in the Army. That's back in 2010. They were reduced to 82,000 in 2015. The Defence Command Paper earlier this year in March reduced that number to 72,500. And now, last week or so, we were told by the Defence Secretary and by others that the refresh to that, which was due to be issued this week, is now not going to be issued or published until after the NATO summit in Vilnius next month. We can predict that's going to cut it even further. This is madness.
I need to bring the others in. So basically, we are... So in a word, then, should we be focusing on our own self rather than just Russia? Because we did a whole page of it yesterday. Everyone talked about it. It was even Armed Forces Day that hardly got mentioned. Henry, just briefly, do you think we need to focus, yes or no?
Yes, of course we do. Yeah.
Right, Danny Armstrong.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the example or the lesson that people learned from yesterday, well, there were two, rather. I mean, as long as this war goes on, the more we learn about Russia's armed forces. And of course, there are schisms, there's factions that are fighting amongst themselves. There's a great deal of infighting that has been bubbling for the entirety of this conflict. I think the lesson to be learned is that, yeah, focus on your own military, but make sure that they're not neglected, make sure that they receive supplies, otherwise you will get people who are doing the fighting out in this case in Bakhmut and in places in Ukraine, rebelling against those above them that don't really see action and that don't particularly like them or look after them. I'm not sure where that Russian phrase came from. I didn't make any sense.
What did it mean, by the way, Danny? What was he saying? What did it mean?
I didn't have a clue.
He speaks Russian and he hasn't got a clue what you're talking about, Henry.
Anyway.
No, it doesn't. No, it's not working. He said it again. Vostok, what? Dilatonkia?
Dilatonkia.
Does that mean anything, Danny?
Which is the east is...
Danny, what does it mean, Danny?
It's about three random words put together.
Peter Edwards.
The second lesson to be learned...
No,
I'm moving on. Sorry, I just wanted to get to the second point, is that there was a lot of coverage. What it showed was that the West got behind Yevgeny Prigozhin, who they saw as the embodiment of evil before, as a volatile, evil leader of mercenaries, and they welcomed him as a hero, as somebody to oust Putin, which, of course, was never the intention of Yevgeny Prigozhin. It was to simply bring in some changes to the defence ministry. But it just shows that, yeah, people do put a lot of attention on Russia, and it is the wrong attention, because, I mean, these are people that were portrayed as the very embodiment of evil just before yesterday, and then welcomed as heroes.
But also, it does show that the reason why Prigozhin was actually angry was because his troops weren't getting these things that they need. So if that's the case, then, of course, with our troops, if we're not getting the things that they need, they may well decide they don't want to be part of the army. Peter Edwards.
Well, in Britain, across all parties and parts of society, we've got to show great praise and gratitude for our brave armed forces, and that's something this channel does very regularly. David Cameron, the coalition, cut the number of soldiers. We have less equipment now than we used to. I don't think that was the right thing to do, even at a time of public spending cuts. But we've got to be clear that Britain's strength comes it comes from the numbers, but it comes from other things as well, like being a nuclear power, upholding the rule of law, and being part of NATO.
Yeah, but do we need to invest more in our own people? Because we're focusing on this whole thing the other day, and as Danny pointed out, suddenly Prigozhin was this potential person who could take down Putin. Ben Habib.
I completely agree that we've got to invest more in our military. We've been hollowing them out, taking advantage of the so-called peace dividend. Actually, since the late 80s, this is a very old phenomena, and every time there's some action somewhere in the world where Britain wants to, come along as the US's puppy dog, we put our armed forces at risk, and often without the right equipment. I mean, there have been complaints about this for years, that they have to go into conflict zones without the right support. And we must invest more. I think we're the only nation in Europe, with the exception of Greece and perhaps one or two others, that meets its NATO commitments, but only just, and we've got to do more for the United Kingdom.
Well, do you know what? We talked about Armed Forces Day. Give me a nod if you knew that it was Armed Forces Day yesterday, just to those who were there. Did you know? Do you know? Yeah? Did you hear much about it?
No.
Nah, not a thing. Right, well, listen, I've got to say thank you very much to Peter Edwards, former editor of The Labellist, for joining me, International Security and Border Control expert Henry Bolton, Bennaby, former Brexit Party MEP, and also Danny Armstrong, political commentator. Thank you very much. Right, well, you're with me. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. After the break, we'll continue with the Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, is it time to focus on our own military? You'll hear the thoughts of my panel, author and broadcaster Christian Hamilton, also broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
It's 4:33. I'm Aaron Armstrong with the headlines in the GB newsroom. The United States says yesterday's armed rebellion in Russia was a direct challenge to Vladimir Putin's authority and reveals cracks appearing in his military strategy. The mutiny by the Wagner mercenary group was called off late last night. It's understood its leader, Yevgeny Prigozhin, will be exiled to Belarus. His fighters were en route to Moscow to remove Russian commanders Prigozhin blames for mishandling the war. Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State for the US, says it could affect Moscow's capabilities in Ukraine.
To the extent this presents a distraction, a loss of focus for the Russians, that may help the Ukrainians on the battlefield. And this really is fundamentally an internal matter for the Russians. We're seeing it unfold. Again, we saw the rising tensions over several months that led to this. But exactly where this goes, we don't know. But what we do know is that we've seen real cracks emerge.
The Prime Minister has set out what he's calling the biggest workforce training expansion of the NHS. Writing in the Sunday Times, Mr Sunak says his long-term workforce plan will aim to train, retain and reform the experienced staff. He says, as a country, we rely on attracting talented people from overseas rather than recruiting at home. Mr Sunak described the 15-year plan as the cornerstone of his government's vision for a better healthcare system. Now, and the final chance to see music legend Sir Elton John is fast approaching. Well, we think it's the final chance. The Rocket Man says he's hanging up his hat. His final show in the UK will be this evening at the Glastonbury Festival. The event's co-organiser has teased details of his Pyramid Stage show, saying he's been carving out a set that's going to be absolutely unique to the festival. But we know that is a farewell tour that's been going on for quite some years. Let's see how it turns out. More on all our stories on our website, gbnews.com. Now, back to Nana.
Thank you, Aaron. Coming up to 37 minutes after 4 o'clock. This is GB News. We are the People's Channel. I'm Nana Akua. Now, on the way at 5 o'clock outside. My very special mystery guest is on the way. She's an 80s pop icon, was famed for her fiery red hair, also rubbed shoulders with Princess Diana, Elton John and the Beatles. Take a listen to this.
It was the theme she had on the screen.
Anyone guess who that might be? Before that, though, the Great British Debate is on the way. That's next. I'm asking, is it time to focus on our own military?
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely
Right.
stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon. This is GB News. I'm Nana Akua. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. Don't forget as well, you can download the GB News app and you can check out all of the programmes here on the channel. But it's time now for the Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, is it time to focus on our own military? Now, yesterday, the media reacted frantically to mutinous Russian mercenary fighters marching towards Moscow, presenting Putin with the most serious challenge to his grip on power in his 23-year rule. At the same time, though, thousands across the UK turned out to pay their respects, marking Armed Forces Day. But as cuts to defence budget continues, and I mean, I just wanted to know whether the nation should actually be focusing on issues closer to home, because the coverage that got, the Putin mutiny, potential mutiny, was huge, but yet yesterday was Armed Forces Day. Earlier this week, Military Chief Sir Tim Radford warned Britain's shrinking armed forces are weakening its influence on NATO after the British Army announced a reduction of 3,000 serving troops. So for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, is it time for us to focus on our own military? Well, joining me to discuss, my panel, broadcaster and author Christine Hamilton, also broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly. Christine. Oh, Danny, I'm going to start with you. What do you think? Is it time? I mean, was it a bit... I mean, yesterday we talked about it, but it turned out not to be much. Is it overkill? Christine.
Christine,
So
you're
I thought you
Christine.
were talking to Danny. You said Danny.
No, because he did a funny face, then I said Christine.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I wasn't listening to the question because I thought you were directing it to Danny.
Well, it's the same
Should
one.
we concentrate on our... Of course we should. I mean, our army is now... I think we've got 70,000 people in the army. Well, it's not even an army, is it?
Fewer than that, I think, 60-odd thousand.
Well, there you go, going down by the minute. Of course we should. I mean, we've got 2 aircraft carriers, but only one is ever used because the other one is being used for spare parts. We couldn't afford the aeroplanes to fly off them. Of course we should. We are one of the few NATO countries that does contribute our allotted amount to NATO spending. We can't just depend on the United States to protect Europe forever. Everybody has to step up to the mark. Germany has increased their spending a certain amount. But yes, at our peril. I mean, the very first duty of any government is to protect the citizens, both at home and abroad, and that's the police and our defence. And it's lamentable for our once great nation, enormously famous seafaring nation. We have just allowed it all to dwindle away.
Well, literally, the first 5 pages of literally every newspaper yesterday was all about Putin, 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 and somewhere along the back was a mention that it's Armed Forces Day. And I just thought to myself, hang on a minute, I respect that we need to see what's going on in Russia because it affects us in the end, but what about our own military?
I disagree with the thought process behind your comment there, because
how do you know what my thought process is?
Because, well, allow me to have a pop. You were saying that basically the front pages unnecessarily were full of...
it's all there as well.
This could be an absolutely historical moment.
Exactly.
Really good. We could be on...
I'm embarrassed to say I didn't even know it was the Armed Forces Day.
Well, exactly, that's my point. I'm not saying that we shouldn't cover it. I'm saying that we focus on all of this to our peril because we need to.
But that potentially could have been a 9/11 moment, and that's why the papers. That's why the papers are full of it. So are you saying that if there wasn't this potential mutiny, the Armed Forces Day should have been on the front page?
No, I'm just saying that whilst we're focusing heavily on this, it would have been nice to see some prominence to our armed forces as well. Because whilst we're focusing all of this, we have to think that if it does become a big deal or there is some big war, what have we got? Because we're focusing on this, we're giving weapons to Ukraine. That's fine if everyone's happy with that. But what about our own armed forces?
Well, because Ukraine is fighting the war for us at the moment. That is the big war.
But if it does spread, then we've got nothing left, Danny.
But we're part of NATO, aren't we? We're part of a collective. We're part of... we've got 65,000 troops. I don't know how many Germany, Italy, France... All of these nations have tens or hundreds of thousands of troops. So I'm not sure that we need to be sort of like the big guy in the classroom here. I think we can be the small guy.
Really? Can you? Are you speaking from experience?
You don't need to be
walking into all of that.
The big fat man. We don't need to be the big bruiser because we're friends with the big bruisers.
I'm not talking about being the big bruiser. I'm talking about our armed forces. I mean, look, we don't have enough troops. 70,000.
We don't have enough troops for what, though?
Well, for war. If there is war,
how do you? We're part of NATO.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't look after what we have here. I mean, there's not even enough equipment. No, NATO aren't going to be happy when it comes to it if we go, oh, we've only got 70,000 troops, we'll take your 200,000 though each.
In my heart, I would like to see our armed forces at vastly greater strength, but it all costs money. And at the moment, we are in deep doo-doo financially as a country. Where are we going to get the money from?
We're giving it all to
Ukraine
Ukraine
at
the moment,
some of the money that we're spending on things like HS2, for example, and on net zero and all that woke nonsense.
11 billion a year.
Well, let's see what the others think, because the show's nothing without them. Let's welcome our great British voice, your opportunity to be on the show and tell me what you think about the topics we're discussing. Let's head over to Bristol. Let's have a chat with regular GBNews voice, Lee Harris. Lee, come on, are we sort of focusing so heavily on Russia that we seem to have lost sight of our own thing?
Yeah, I think there is definitely something to that, and I agree, with you 100% that we should, as Christine just said, defence should be the first priority of any government. And as other guests have already said, by 2025, the size of the British Army will be at its smallest since the year 1714, apparently, with just 72,500 regular soldiers, which was about 100,000 when the Conservatives came into power. And as you were rightly saying, it's not just personnel either. The number of tanks are being cut. The RAF is losing 24 of its older Typhoon jets. Its fleet of Hercules transport aircraft are going as well. The Royal Navy are retiring 2 of its older frigates early before the new ones come into service, which means apparently about 25% of our frigates are in refit. It's a huge concern. I, probably like most people, do support helping Ukraine the best we can. I hope we can continue to do so, but serious questions do need to be asked about leaving our own military equipped and how, of course, this is going to impact our own defences in the future. What I find quite worrying is Ben Wallace said that the army is like a fine wine that had gone over by about 15 years ago. Lord Nick Halton, who was the Chief of Defence Staff between 2013 and 2016, said it was a national embarrassment that the UK does not have a properly functioning reserve, and our armed forces have been eroded to the point where we should all worry. And all this is happening, Nana, while the government says threats are increasing. It is a big worry.
Well, listen, Lee Harris has them very succinctly put. Thank you so much. That's great British voice. Thank you. Well, what do you think? Are we literally leaving ourselves exposed? I mean, we don't have much going on with our armed forces. What are your thoughts? GBNews@GBNews.com. You're with me. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. Coming up at 5, outside, my very special mystery guest, redhead 80s pop icon. She's rubbed shoulders with Princess Diana, Elton John and the Beatles. Take a listen to this.
It was a theme she had on a scheme.
Yes, of course, it's a major hit song. It was used in the PG Tips advert. So who is she? She's on the way. Then coming up at 4:50, Worldview. That's next. I'll be crossing live to the Kremlin to speak to Russian journalist Alexei Ver to get all the latest there on yesterday's shock mutiny. Stay tuned.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6 is Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com? You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon. If you just tuned in, welcome on board. We are GB News, the People's Channel. I'm Nana Akua. It's just coming up to 52 minutes after 4 o'clock. We're live on TV, online And on digital radio, it's time now for World View. And what looked like a mutiny in Russia yesterday appears to have been called off overnight. The mercenary Russian fighting force, the Wagner Group, led by Yevgeny Prigozhin, has already taken over the southern city of Rostov-on-Don and was said to be marching towards Moscow before turning back. So joining me to talk all about this in Russia is Russian journalist Alexei Via. Alexei, thank you very much for joining me. He's live in Red Square. What is the situation in Moscow right now?
Hello, Nana. Well, it's a wonderful sunny day in the Russian capital. You can see things here in downtown Moscow are not much different from the usual. We see a lot of tourist people seem pretty upbeat. There is still counter-terrorist operation regime in place, which means that all public events have been cancelled for now. The mayor of Moscow has announced that Monday will be a day off, but barricades are now being demolished. Most routes have been opened again for car circulation. We still have a lot of law enforcement here on the streets of Moscow who are equipped with some heavy gear like bulletproof vests and helmets and machine guns, which chance to speak to some law enforcement officers today, and they have assured me that they have everything under control. There is nothing to worry about, and it actually seems that we indeed have avoided the catastrophe.
So how was the conflict resolved in the end then?
Yesterday's conflict, which could have actually led to a full-scale bloody civil war in Russia, it has been resolved peacefully. It has been brokered by the Belarusian president Alexander Lukashenko, who has negotiated a solution. He stepped up as an intermediary between the Wagner Group and the Kremlin. According to the deal, Mr. Prigozhin and his soldiers will get an immunity from criminal prosecution, and they will have a chance to leave to Belarus safely. And this is the word of the Russian President Vladimir Putin himself. Again, some unofficial sources close to the Wagner Group are claiming that we might just see some changes in the leadership of the Russian Ministry of Defense, but this information has not been confirmed yet by the Kremlin. And the Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov has said that the fate of the Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu has not been discussed during negotiations with the Wagner Group, but I guess we will see.
And the story, how has it been covered in Russia in terms of the media?
Well, it doesn't come as a surprise that this news about the armed coup attempt in Russia is on the front pages of all major newspapers, both here in Russia and abroad. We have two very different takes on the story. Russian state-controlled media are obviously not happy about the coup attempt, but they are very happy with the peaceful resolution. They're mostly focusing on how the coup attempt, on the damage caused by the Wagner's troops. For example, in Rostov region alone, 10,000 square kilometers of routes have been damaged by Wagner tanks. At the same time, Russian opposition media, they are telling a very different story. They're basically accusing Mr. Prigozhin of not achieving his goal of the regime change in Russia. Some commentators go as far as branding Russia as a failed state because of the coup attempt. And it's also interesting to have a look at how the Western media are reporting on the situation. For example, CNN has sourced some unidentified informants saying that U.S. intelligence community actually was aware that Mr. Prigozhin was preparing a coup d'etat in Russia. The question is then why they haven't informed the Kremlin. At the same time, the Italian newspaper, The Republic, has published an article saying that the day the coup was taking place, NATO officials have contacted the Kremlin, and they wanted to make sure that the Russian government knows that they have nothing to do with the coup d'etat. They also wanted to make sure that this mutiny will not lead to any nuclear incident.
Well, Alexei,
overall,
Alexei, so you had one more thing to say. Go for it. You've got about 20 seconds.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that even though Western governments have not openly supported the rebellion, there have been a lot of support coming from the Kiev's regime and its Western allies. They have inadvertently supported the coup d'etat in Russia. I don't think it can actually make our relations with the West any worse because, well, there is simply not much room for deterioration left. Thank you, Nana.
Alexei, really good to talk to you. Lovely to hear your thoughts. And thank you for joining us live in Red Square in Moscow. He's doing that right now. He's a Russian journalist. Right, let's travel over to America and let's have a chat with the host of the Politics People podcast, Paul Duddridge. He's there in LA to give us an update of what's going on. Paul, start me off with Hunter Biden. What's going on with Hunter Biden? Has he been arrested?
Well, Hunter Biden, yes, he's been prosecuted and he's now reached a plea deal, which is marvellous news. So for tax evasion and illegal gun possession, he's basically going to get a fine and a slap on the wrist. And if the content of the laptop is anything to go by, he'll enjoy it. So he managed a plea deal, and basically he's being let off scot-free. Wesley Snipes' stories resurfaced, where he did 3 years for similar charges a little while back. So there are cries of unequal justice from the Republican Party and the way that Hunter Biden is being handled in law for quite serious. I mean, when you evade tax in the US, it's usually custodial. It's usually a custodial sentence, and he has admitted to actively evading tax, and that is being met with, as I said, practically a fine and treated as a misdemeanor. So it's hopefully that means good news for Donald Trump, whose trial date has now been set for August the 14th for the documents case that we've been talking about. He committed the heinous crime of storing some documents in a box. And so he is now set for trial date on August the 14th. Now, it's probably going to be set back. They're probably going to be able to move that because of the campaigning, etc., to something like December. But it just goes to show this took years to get Hunter Biden's case even heard. The prosecution are moving very, very quickly against Donald Trump, and some are obviously making comparisons and saying that one of them looks very unfair. But, you know, Trump needs to hire Hunter Biden's attorneys, because their defense is, my dad lives in the White House.
Well, yeah, that's good, isn't it? And finally, you've got about 20 seconds, Paul. Talk to me about Trump. What's going on with Trump and his polling?
Trump is polling really, really well. The only thing I wanted to say is a fantastic way they report it here. Trump is polling, every indictment increases his popularity. But I saw a beautiful headline which said, you know, they're very anti him in the mainstream press. And they said, Trump, 32% of Republicans are looking for another candidate to vote for. And it's kind of like, yeah, you won't say that he's got 68% support. So that's the way even his increasing poll numbers are being reported in the mainstream press here. It's he can't, they will not give him any plaudits at all for his successes. So yes, that's Trump in the news this week.
Well, listen, thank you so much, Paul Duddridge, host of the Politics People podcast. You're watching GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. It's 5 o'clock. More to come. So welcome on board to GB News. I'm Nana Akua. For the next hour, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and of course it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. So joining me today is broadcaster and author Christine Hamilton, and also broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly. Still to come on the way every Sunday at 5. I'm joined by a celebrity, a former MP, or someone who's had an extremely interesting career, and take a look at life after the job. We talk highs, lows and lessons learned and what comes next on the outside. And today my special mystery guest is a red-haired 80s pop icon. She rubbed shoulders with Princess Diana, Elton John and the Beatles. Loads of her fabulous music, some of her favourite songs, one of mine. You'll hear a bit more of that at about 5 o'clock. If you worked out who she is, then for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, are the government out of touch with the public? Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has advised members of the public to hold their nerve amid all the mortgage mayhem, whilst reports suggest he's expected to hit households with £170 a year green levy. So are the government out of touch? Email gbnews@gbnews.com or tweet me at GBNews. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Right, Aaron Armstrong here in the GB Newsroom, 1 minute past 5. Let's get you up to date with the headlines. We start with the United States, who have said that yesterday's armed rebellion in Russia was a direct challenge to Vladimir Putin's authority and reveals cracks appearing in his military strategy. The mutiny by the Wagner mercenary group was called off last night. It's understood its leader, Yevgeny Prigozhin, will be exiled to Belarus. Now, his fighters were en route to Moscow. They were some 4 hours away. They were on their way to remove Russian commanders that Prigozhin blames for mishandling the war. Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, says the turmoil caused by this rebellion could take months to play out, but it's likely to affect Moscow's capabilities in Ukraine.
To the extent this presents a distraction, a loss of focus for the Russians, that may help the Ukrainians on the battlefield. Exactly where this goes, we don't know. But what we do know is that we've seen real cracks emerge. Again, a direct challenge to Putin's authority.
And while the immediate risk to Vladimir Putin appears to have been contained, emergency measures remain in place in Moscow, as our journalist there, Alexei Veer, told GB News earlier.
Everything has been resolved. It seems that the catastrophe has been avoided. We still do have some extra law enforcement here on the streets, and they are wearing some heavy gear. For example, bulletproof vests and helmets. They have machine guns, which is unusual. But as you can see here, life continues. The situation here in downtown Moscow doesn't seem any different from the usual. The Red Square is still closed, but other than that, everything seems fine.
Now, a 15-year-old girl has died after being pulled from the sea in Cleethorpes on the beach in north-east Lincolnshire. Police say a 15-year-old boy was also pulled from the water. He was taken to hospital but has since been discharged. And a 5-year-old boy has died after falling from a harbour in Padstow, the seaside town in Cornwall. The child was airlifted to hospital. Devon and Cornwall police say they're currently treating his death as an accident. Hundreds of mourners have been gathering in London for silent walking vigil to mark the first anniversary of Zara Alina's death. The 35-year-old law graduate was sexually assaulted and killed as she walked home from a night out on June the 26th last year. 29-year-old Jordan McSweeney is currently serving a life sentence. He was jailed for at least 38 years. Well, earlier, friends and family of Ms Alina joined the vigil at Valentine's Park in Ilford, and Farah Naz, her aunt, says we need to keep spreading the word.
It could have been any one of us, your sister, your daughter, your niece. Let's spread the word. Let's disrupt violence against women and girls. Let's together interrupt it. Let's together confront it. Let's not look the other way, and let's get other people not to look the other way.
All state secondary schools in England are now to be equipped with a defibrillator. The government says secondary schools received priority because the risk of cardiac arrest increases with age. The Department for Health says the devices will also be rolled out in primary and special schools. That's due to be completed by the end of the summer term. And Glastonbury has received some criticism for a lack of star names, but not for its headline act. Sir Elton John will be approaching soon, not too long to wait. The Rocket Man is, well, we think to hang up his hat. This is supposed to be his final show on home turf at Worthy Farm this evening. The event's co-organiser, Emily Evis, has said that the stage show on the Pyramid stage will be a set that's going to be completely unique to the festival, although we know his farewell tour has been running for some time.
Turned up 3 hours after these guys. I was here at 7 a.m. I was third in the queue, and you can't miss Elton John. Last ever UK gig, Glastonbury. What a day.
Look, I kind of kept the tickets initially, but just for like Elton. So I figured like this is such a once in a lifetime chance that I can sleep any other day, but like front row Glastonbury last UK concert, that's probably going to be like a once in a lifetime chance.
Well, they should have a good time if they've had enough sleep. We'll see. It doesn't really matter when you're at Worthy Farm, though. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now it's back to Nana.
This is GB News. Welcome aboard. It's coming up to 7 minutes after 5 o'clock. I'm Nana Akua. And for the next hour, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and of course it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. So joining me today, it's broadcaster and author Christine Hamilton, also broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly. Now, still to come every Sunday at 5, I'm joined by a celebrity, a former MP, or someone who's had an extremely interesting career to take a look at life after the job. We talk highs, lows and lessons learned and what comes next on the outside. And today, my special mystery guest is a red-haired 80s pop icon. She's rubbed shoulders with Princess Diana, Elton John and the Beatles. She's got a fabulous track that was a superb hit. She's got a... have a listen.
Don't push too far, your dreams are China in your hand.
Yeah. So for the... you've worked it out, haven't you? And for the Great British Debate, I'm asking, are the government out of touch with the public? Now, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has advised members of the public to hold their nerve amid all the mortgage mayhem, whilst reports suggest he's expected to hit households with £170 a year green levy. So are the government completely out of touch? Email me your thoughts, gbviews@gbnews.com, or tweet me at gbnews. Right, now I'm very, very excited to say that it's time for Outside. And my guest today is a fiery redhead who rose to fame in the 80s as a pop sensation, releasing her first single 37 years ago. I can't believe it was that long ago. She was born in Liverpool and famously kept two of the Beatles at number 2 for 5 weeks, one in the singles charts and the other in the album charts. Take a listen.
Don't push too far, your dreams are China in your hand. Don't wish too far.
Her song was also used on the PG Tips advert. And not only can my guest sing, she once appeared in an episode of Benny Dorm as herself. And during the height of her career, she mixed with royalty and even met Princess Diana. She's also considered Elton John and Paul McCartney as friends. I'm excited to say this music legend and icon joins me now. Who is it? Of course, it's the fabulous Carol Decker. Carol, so lovely to meet you. Fantastic.
How are you, Anna? Listen, I hate to start the interview like this, but you keep cutting out all the time, so hopefully I'll be able to understand you.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. Well, listen, Carol, let's start with you then. Tell me a little bit about you and how you came into the music.
How did I start singing? Well, I was kind of late to the party. I was actually 22 and I'd gone back to art school in Shrewsbury as a mature student because I didn't kind of know what to do with myself, really, which is kind of why I went. And I'd always been able to sing and I'd always been told I could sing. You know, since I was little, people would comment on my voice. And so in art school, I met a very different and eclectic sort of person. They were just fantastic, crazy types. And someone said to me, why don't you go for it? Why don't you join a band? I know a guy, he's got a local band, they're looking for a singer, come to a party with me at the weekend. So I did that, auditioned for their band. We literally were a garage band in Ludlow because we just played in the drummer's garage all the time. And that was the start. And then it went from sort of local bands and because I grew up in the Midlands, even though I am a Scouser, I grew up in the Midlands. So my kind of stomping ground was Wolverhampton, Birmingham, the Potteries. So back then there was Pebble Mill, the television station, Pebble Mill at 1, and then Beacon Radio at Wolverhampton. Hopefully you've got a session there, or BRMB in Birmingham, and loads of gigs. And then you try to sort of crawl your way out of the Midlands and make it to London. Because don't forget, this is a 1,000 years before mobile phones and the internet and building up your own YouTube following and stuff. You just literally had to get in a van, schlap up and down the M1 and hope somebody came to see you.
Well, I know I was there when your fabulous track came out. You were one of my icons. Did you expect your career to be so successful? Because it really was. Did you expect such a big hit as well?
With China, sorry, I'm lip reading you. Sorry, viewers, sorry, listeners. I'm actually lip reading because the sound's getting up. China, no, if that's what you just asked me. Heart and Soul I knew was a massive hit. Absolutely knew it. It's my personal favourite of our classics. China in Your Hand wasn't even born when we got our record deal. So the songs, the demos that got us our record deal, and to be able to do our first 2 albums with the amazing Roy Thomas Baker, who produced all of Queen's big hits, were Valentine, Sex Talk, Monkey House, Heart and Soul. This was amongst the hits that got us our deal. And we were in the studio just outside of Chicago, and one track, can't remember which one it wasn't working. And Roy said, we need to dump a track. We're wasting time, we're wasting money. Do you have anything else? Because we're now a track short. So Ronnie and I had been working on China at home, and I had literally had a cassette in my bag, a little cassette. And I said, well, we got this, it's kind of half finished, and played it to Roy, and he went, that's an amazing song. So Roy Thomas Baker, well, just for a little bit of background for everybody, he produced Bohemian Rhapsody, so that gives you some idea of how his mind works. So when he heard China, he just turned it into this monster epic thing that everybody knows and loves.
What was it like having such a big hit? And did you expect it to be such a big hit?
No. All I ever wanted was a hit record. You got no idea what's going to work. It's not a formula. Otherwise, if we could all get it right every time, we'd all be at number one with everything we put out. So no, I had confidence in the song. I thought it sounded amazing. I had every confidence in my vocal performance. We would never let anything go out, and neither would Roy. That wasn't a tip-top performance. So I knew it was quality, but I had no idea how big it was going to become. Your guess is as good as mine. What makes a hit single, really? What captures the public's imagination at the time?
And what was it like having that hit single?
Well, all your dreams come true, and so we had firstly a quadruple platinum debut album. Heart and Soul went to number 4 in the States, and that rocketed all around the world courtesy of the quite new MTV. And then China came out at home, went to number 1 for 5 weeks, and went to number 1 in lots of other places as well. So all of a sudden, we were on the dole 3 months before we made our first album in 1986. And so the next thing, I kid you not, it's like everybody wants to know you when you're hot to trot, when you're the latest new thing. And we were like jetting all over the world. We were using private jets because, we do Top of the Pops at home, and then the German or Munich equivalent to Top of the Pops, they needed you, and the scheduled flights weren't running at the right time, so a jet would be ordered. And we were also signed to Virgin Records when Richard Branson owned the label, as well as the airline. So if we flew transatlantically, we were automatically put in first class. I can't tell you. And then, your name opens doors, and you get the best table, and all sorts of wonderful things happen. You get invited to all the red carpet events, and it's just absolutely everything you think it would be. It's amazing. Yeah.
And so then what happened to T'Pau? Because they were there, and then they sort of disappeared, and I was like, where have they gone? What did you do afterwards? What happened after?
Well, we had 3 top 10 albums, and we had 8 top 40 singles, so we did okay, the original lineup. And then, the 90s was tough. I went through some personal stuff. So my songwriting partner and the guy that put the band together with me, we were personal partners for over 13 years, and that relationship broke up. My dad died, the label dropped us, you name it, everything. I went from this glorious existence to being quite depressed. I'll be completely honest about it. Everything sort of went wrong. And then in the 90s, because I'd made a little bit of a name for myself, I was able to do things like a little bit of acting. I did some West End work, I did some telly, I did some independent movies. That's not adult movies, that's just independent movies, everybody. I did some, I wasn't that desperate. I did some radio presenting for quite a lot of stations, and I met my now husband. And we started our family in 1998. So I was very busy. I just wasn't up in your grill anymore, but I had lots to do. And then I got working again to the late 90s. I put a band together. Then 2001 started the first kind of, the 80s Renaissance thing that's been going on for quite a while. So I did this big tour called Here and Now with Paul Young, Kim Wilde, go west to power and China crisis, and we all went on tour together, and we sold out all the arenas around the UK as a package, and that sort of thing just hasn't stopped since, as I'm sure everybody knows. You know, there's tons and tons of festivals, constantly working. Just got back from Dubai, did a big show out there, so it all came back again, which is lovely. But I did kind of have to think on my feet across the 90s, that's for sure. But I was busy with babies, so that's okay.
So is that what you're doing now? Are you doing all the tours and concerts and things? You're still touring?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. If anybody is interested or cares, you can always find us, you know, out there on the internet, on Twitter or our Facebook, and we're always gigging, and there's a list of gigs and events, you know, coming to a town near you, singing in a field near you across the summer. And last year I did a fantastic Night of the Proms tour with Nick Kershaw, Amy MacDonald and Yolanda Brown, and we toured across Germany with a 60-piece orchestra and a 30-piece choir and a 6-piece rock band to 15,000 people a night. Just, it's great. It's fantastic. Life's good.
Well, listen, Carol, it's so good to see you and to talk to you in person. I'm sorry our sound from me to you wasn't great, but we can hear you clearly. Carol, I wish you all the success. I'm hopefully going to come to one of your concerts, because everyone you mentioned, that's back in the day for me. So, Carol Decker, thank you very much.
You'll love it, Nana. Good to talk to you. And nice
Lovely
to meet
to talk to you too. That is the amazing Carol Decker, singer and musician back in the day. She was huge. She's doing so well. Even today, you can catch her on Twitter, check her out on her Instagram. But if you just joined me, welcome on board. It's time now on the way, the Great British Debate. I'm asking, are the government out of touch with the public? Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has advised members of the public to hold their nerve amid all the mortgage mayhem, whilst reports suggest it's expected to hit households with £170 a year green levy. So is he completely out of touch?
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon. This is GB News. Welcome aboard if you've just tuned in. Where have you been? It's coming up to 23 minutes after 5 o'clock. I'm Nana Akua. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. And it is time now for the Great British Debate this hour. I'm asking, are the government out of touch with the public? Now, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has advised members of the public to hold their nerve amid all the mortgage mayhem. He also said that those affected should recognise that inflation is the real enemy, while supporting the action taken by the Bank of England earlier this week. Interest rates have now hit 5%, which in my day wasn't that big. It was what you would expect. But obviously a lot of people are heavily mortgaged. And these are the highest levels since 2008, with people's mortgages set to go through the roof. Experts have estimated that homeowners' disposable income could drop by as much as 20% as a result. And according to reports, energy bills are expected to increase, with households being forced to pay a £170 a year green levy. So does the government even consider the general public when making these decisions? What are your thoughts? So for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, are the government out of touch with the public? To discuss this, I'm joined by Dr. Roger Gewolb. Have I said it right? It's Gewolb, I've got it right. Former advisor to the Bank of England and UK Treasury. And Belinda de Lucy, former Brexit Party MEP and political commentator. And Suzanne Evans, political commentator. And Rob Williams, Socialist Party trade union organiser. Well, I'm going to start with you, Roger. Just to go straight to the question, do you think that the government are out of touch, first of all, with...
Totally. I've been in this country many decades, and I've never seen anything like it. This morning, the interview where the Prime Minister said, hold the line, was really the cherry on the cake for me. That's just unbelievable. He supports Andrew Bailey and the Bank of England with their rate rises. In other words, he supports Mr. Bailey, who said, do not ask for a pay rise. Do not attempt to make profits in your businesses at the present time, because you people are causing the inflation to keep going up. I mean, where are we? In China? Is this... What an oaf. What a ridiculous thing to say. Can I also say one thing? You just mentioned that 5%, and in my time that wasn't... A lot of people are saying that. Read the Leeds Building Society report, which points out that a 6%, 6.4%, if to be precise, mortgage rate today would have been 25.7% in 1980. So a 5% mortgage today probably would have been about 18% back then. So those weren't the good old days, folks.
Oh, wow. OK, so that's interesting. Rob Williams, the Socialist Party and trade union organiser. Do you think they're out of touch?
Well, absolutely out of touch. They've trashed the economy. It's funny at the moment, isn't it? The Tory party is so split that every few months there's a new Prime Minister, and it's almost as if they are trying to kid us. They haven't been in power for 13 years. So, yeah, these are the people who are telling workers that they shouldn't have a pay rise that matches inflation. Real inflation is over 11% at the moment. Food inflation is probably nearer 20%. So workers are taking strike action at the moment, because not to do that would mean that they're going to have their living standards crushed at this moment in time. So time's up for this government, isn't it?
Well, surely, though, if the pay rise went with inflation, as it would, I'm just going to come back to Roger on that. You talked about 11%. What if the pay rise goes with inflation? Would that not also encourage inflation? Isn't that an issue?
So the cost of living is going through the roof. These mortgage increases will do that again. I think some people will have their mortgages go up in a little over a year and a half by £400 or £500 a month in that time. So inflation is spiralling, prices are going through the roof, but workers' wages haven't kept with that. That's the lie that workers' wages cause inflation. It's not the case.
Is it a lie, Roger?
It's a lie, because there has been an increase in wages, but not enough to cause inflation. There's also labor shortages which are to blame, and people go Brexit, Brexit. Still not enough to cause the inflation. The inflation that we have is cost-push inflation, non-consumer-driven inflation. We're not spending. It's driven by food and energy and services out of our control, and you don't bring it down. You never bring it down by interest rate rises. You're just crushing people.
Well, let me bring Suzanne in on this. Suzanne.
Yeah, I have to agree with Roger on that. You know, people have tried to say there are all kinds of causes for inflation. They talk about wage increases. They talk about Brexit. The fact is, what has caused this spiral of inflation are two things, really. It's the fact that we locked down our society for the best part of 3 years, sent businesses to the wall, stopped businesses trading, put huge amounts of quantitative easing, money printing into the economy, some 100 billion over that period. And then, of course, we had hot on the heels of that, the war in Ukraine, which sent energy prices spiraling. So you've got this combination of war, which also caused problems for the supply chains, which are already very hard hit and leading to price rises as a consequence of COVID policies. So here we are. We're in a terrible position. Is the government out of touch on it? I was deeply disappointed when all Rishi Sunak seemed to be able to say in response to the fact that the inflation figures for May hadn't budged at all, but they were just stuck where they'd been in April. All he seemed to be able to say was, well, I'm 100% on it. It's going to be okay. We're going to get through it. Well, you might feel confident about that, Rishi, or a very wealthy man, but a lot of the rest of us are not feeling confident at all.
But Belinda de Lucy.
Yeah, I agree with Suzanne. You know, when Rishi took the keys to number 10, YouGov did a poll, and 2/3 of those polled said that they believed a wealthy businessman and a man who was married to a billionaire's daughter was going to be out of touch with the ordinary person. Now, normally I wouldn't associate with politicians and how much money they have and how deservingly they were of power because of it. But actually, in this current climate and the actions of the Rishi and Hunt collaboration have proved they are desperately out of touch with the people. People are struggling with bills and they slap on a £170 green levy, an unnecessary green levy on people when they're struggling. People need housing, people need better public services, and they open the gates to 600,000 people a year. You know, people want to stop the boats, and more people have arrived in boats this June so far than the whole of June last year. And it's because they see people as numbers. They're bank clerks and they just see short-term solutions. They don't understand the cost of this to the average person on the street because maybe they have never experienced it themselves, and the optics of it are terrible. They're devoid of ideas. They're like a vacuum of stagnation. They may well steady the ship, but there's no sail, no motor, no map, no compass. There's no plan for growth or optimism, and that is preventing investment in our country being attractive for people to come here and create wealth. I'm so disappointed with the uninspiring Rishi Hunt government at the moment.
Well, Rishi seems to think, Belinda, that we should hold our nerve. That's what he's saying.
That's so patronising.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a classic example. He is not a people person, Rishi. This is not what you say, especially because many people put a bit of the blame at Conservative policies. You know, billions were lost during COVID to fraud and error, and the government have had little action over clawing, for example, the £5 billion that were lost to the taxpayer over the furlough scheme. No interest in clawing that back. £6 million a day on housing men that come here from France. There's such a waste of money going on, and they don't. People look at them and they see that they're responsible for a lot of the taxpayers' burden, and now they're asking us to fork out for their middle-class green project.
Yeah, but it's the theme that, I mean, Roger, they're asking us to fork out extra 170 quid now, some green ideological project, and that we should hold our nerve. This feels like an extremely patronising thing. What should they actually be doing?
It's all patronising. It's been patronising from the start. This government, their solution to the energy crisis and the rest of everything is gaslighting. They just tell us things are wonderful and they're doing so well. I mean, it's dismal. Rishi's so rich that his biggest financial concern is whether to give his kids their pocket money in Bitcoin or Ethereum. I mean, they just don't live in the real world. They have no idea what's going on. I spend a lot of time with politicians on both sides. And frankly, on both sides, none of them really understand the people I also spend my time with, which are the financially challenged people of this country. They really don't get it. I want to hire a coach and get some people from Westminster out of the bubble and have them come and have dinner, or probably no dinner, or cold beans with a lot of families, particularly up north, and see how people actually live. Because, bless them, they just don't get it while they're standing at the Commons bar.
Well, listen, Roger Keeble, thank you very much. He's a former advisor to the Bank of England and UK Treasury. Belinda Lucy, former Brexit Party MEP and political commentator. Suzanne Evans, political commentator. And Rob Williams, Socialist Party and trade union organiser. Thank you for your thoughts. But please get in touch. What do you think? This is GB News. I'm Nana Akua. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. On the way, we'll continue with our Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, are the government out of touch with the public? You'll hear the thoughts of my panel, broadcaster and author Christine Hamilton, also broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
It's 5:32. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. The United States says yesterday's armed rebellion in Russia was a direct challenge to Vladimir Putin's authority and reveals cracks appearing in his military strategy. The mutiny by the Wagner mercenary group was called off last night, and it's understood its leader, Yevgeny Prigozhin, will be exiled to Belarus. Vladimir Putin described it as an act of treason in a televised address. The US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, says the turmoil could take months to play out, but is likely to affect Moscow's capabilities in Ukraine.
To the extent this presents a distraction, a loss of focus for the Russians, that may help the Ukrainians on the battlefield. Exactly where this goes, we don't know. But what we do know is that we've seen real cracks emerge. Again, a direct challenge to Putin's authority.
All state secondary schools in England are now equipped with a defibrillator. The government says secondary schools received priority because of the risk of cardiac arrest increases with age. The Department for Health says the device will also be rolled out in primary and special schools. That's due to be completed by the end of the summer term. And the Met Office is warning people to enjoy the heat responsibly. It's as a 15-year-old girl died after being pulled from the sea in Lincolnshire. Now, the forecaster recorded 31.7 degrees in Lincolnshire, close to the top of the temperature charts. 32.2, though, was recorded in Surrey earlier this month. Thunderstorms and heavy showers are expected to hit northern England, Scotland and parts of Northern Ireland later this evening. More on all of our stories on our website, as always, gbnews.com. Now, back to Nana.
Thank you, Aaron. Coming up, taxpayers face a £170 a year green levy on top of their energy bills within a few days. That's according to reports. So for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, are the government out of touch with the public? Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has advised members of the public to hold their nerve amid all the mortgage mayhem. Perhaps he could help to pay some of the bills. But what kind of incentive is that? What do you think? Stay tuned. We'll discuss that on the way next.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com? You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon. It's coming up to 39 minutes after 5 o'clock. This is GB News. We are the People's Channel. I'm Nana Akua. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. It's now time for the Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, are the government out of touch with the public? Interest rates hit 5% this week and are now at the highest level since 2008. And people's mortgages are set to go through the roof, with some estimates that homeowners' disposable income could drop by as much as 20% as a result. Did the government even consider the general public when making these decisions? I mean, it seems for him to say, hold your nerve, sounds as though he thinks you can just go, oh, don't worry, it's 5%. We'll just hang on to that. It'll be fine. Listen, people are worried about holding on to their homes. Hold on to your homes is what you should be saying. And so for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, are the government out of touch with the public? Let's see what my panel make of that. I'm joined by broadcaster and journalist Christine Hamilton, and also broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly. Christine, I've made you a journalist.
You have
written before.
You can make me what you like. I'm just a retired housewife. Yes, of course they have. To use those words is absolutely extraordinary. He's basically saying to hard-pressed Britons, and let's not forget that on balance, people with mortgages are more likely to be Tory voters. So he's really talking to his own core vote, which is slipping away from him. Oh, that's all right, just get a grip and it'll be all right. Some people will be able to manage these increases. Some people with mortgages will have fat, as it were, that they can skim off, and they will be able to, but there are going to be thousands of people, goodness knows, maybe millions, who are going to be in serious trouble. They will not be able to afford it. They will have to cut everything else to the bone, and still they won't be able to cope with these repayments. So it is unbelievable. And I didn't used to buy this line that he's too rich to be Prime Minister, but his latest comments do make me realise. And, of course, don't forget that Jeremy Hunt is almost as rich. I mean, nobody's quite as rich as Rishi. He's richer than the Queen, apparently, he and his wife. But Hunt is also incredibly rich. They are two... I think it was Nadine Dorries who described Boris and somebody else as two posh boys out of touch with reality. And I think the way he has... It's just the mood music. I mean, we all know he's rich. That's fine, and it shouldn't matter, but the way he handles it, and, I mean, to me, the Tory party is holed beneath the waterline, and they are now bailing out with a bit of a tea strainer, and it is not going to work. And they are running out of time. You know, there is no time to get things right. Liz Truss was right, go for growth. But look what happened to her.
Yeah, the Tory party damaged goods. I think we're going to see maybe a new party in 12 to 18 months' time. I refuse to accept that his wealth has got anything to do with a connection to the normal working man or woman. He's incredibly wealthy. So is Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson went to Eton. He had all the wealth in the world. He's a multimillionaire.
He's not as wealthy as Rishi.
No, he's not. No, he's not. But he's never had to worry about a mortgage payment.
Oh, he might have done.
He does. He's got so many children and wives and goodness, ex-wives.
Well, OK. All right, well, let me just do an embarrassing U-turn and...
money.
This guy is reversing. OK, all right. I think that just because you're minted, I think you can still have a connection with normal people.
Well, you can, but his comments hold your nerve, as if people could just like, OK, so the mortgage rates have gone up, interest rates have gone up. Just hold your nerve.
Yeah. Come on, it's a crass thing to say.
Don't have a third holiday
but he's the Prime Minister. He needs to do better than that, and especially with him being rich, suddenly the optics turn to him, and we're like, well, how could you say that?
People use that against him, his wealth. Yeah, and I've noticed this, because away from broadcasting, if you're not aware, I'm a car dealer, and I've had the quietest June ever, and the quietest...
Really?
Yeah, the quietest May ever, because people, whenever there's a spike in interest rates, people then have to think, OK, well, I'm not going to go and buy that convertible spontaneously because we're having a heat wave. That market's disappeared. It really has. So it's essential purchases only, and a car isn't an essential purchase, unless, of course, your MOT failure...
Or unless you're trying to get to London, you're not going to be hammered with oulas if you don't get it.
Well, let's get back to what you said, though, because you were talking about the fact that his wealth doesn't affect him. So carry on, because you've not really confirmed.
Well, all I'm saying is that I disagree with you when you say that his mega wealth means he can't connect to normal men and women.
Do you think he's connecting by telling people to hold their nerve?
No, well, I think that's a crass thing to say, but it's a common thing for people to say and lambast Rishi Sunak because he's so wealthy.
But he says he does these sort of things all the time. It seems that he doesn't
like
seem
what, though? What else has he done?
OK, let's go with the fact that he'd pretended that that reasonably priced car was sort of his when it clearly wasn't, and then he couldn't know how to pay for it because he'd obviously never used a credit card.
What's that got to do with wealth?
Because he realised that he needed to show off. No, but he tried to make it look like he was something that he's not. So it does have effect. That he,
But he's criticised for wearing like £900 shoes. So why? He's a multi-millionaire. Let the lad wear £900 shoes. Doesn't mean that he can't look after the working...
When he went somewhere where people were really impoverished. Listen, you've worked for the BBC. I've worked for the BBC. I've done it for him. When we go to something, we were always told, if you're going to an area that's really impoverished and don't go in Gucci and Prada or show off what you have, and be considerate. He went there in Prada shoes, you know what I mean? You're going to see people in a working-class area. It affects people.
What do you want him to go in, a pair of Clarks?
No, he just needs to go in and just realise where he is, and he doesn't seem to.
Sorry, Christine.
Well, it's all right. No, two things. First of all, Mrs Putin... Mrs Sunak.
Freudian.
Sorry. Mrs Sunak, when she was hosting the street party in Downing Street for the coronation, she was wearing my blouse in many sizes smaller, which was a Bowden blouse. So that's sort of street cred. But what worries me far more than whether he wears these Prada slides and goodness knows what, is that he says, basically, he's saying, don't worry, I'm going to sort it out. But I'm sorry, I have no confidence that he knows how he's going to sort it out.
That's got nothing to do with his wealth. That's my point.
That's what I'm saying. More important to me than his wealth and his...
is his ability to sort it out.
He does not inspire confidence that he is getting a grip and holding his nerve. I see no evidence that he and, what's his name, Hunt, know what to do to get us out of this
They don't know what to do.
Well, don't forget his surname right.
Yeah,
well,
I'm sorry, yes.
Well, listen, this show's nothing without you and your views. Let's welcome some of our great British voices on their opportunity to be on the show and tell us what they really think about the topics we're discussing. I've got 4 of them. I'm going to start with Dr. Seshni Mudlia. Seshni, if they lost touch, hold your nerve. We're going to increase interest rates. Don't worry about it.
Good afternoon, Nana. Yes, I agree with you, with Danny and with Christine. They are out of touch with reality, and it is affecting the majority of people. The interest rates going up, as you said, Nana, it's going to affect people, the majority of people, and how are they going to be able to pay their mortgages? You know, so something will have to give. They will have to make cuts in other areas of their finances. So definitely they're out of touch with reality.
Well, he said it's going to be tough, but we might have to make some difficult decisions. Well, make a different one. Mike Donovan, he's there in Oxfordshire. Hello, Mike. What do you think?
Hi, good afternoon. Let's talk about principles, not personalities. The reality is that we need banking reform if we really want to kickstart this economy. There is empirical evidence to suggest that interest rates are positively correlated with growth, not the other way around. And the reality is that banking is essential for putting money. Since the quantitative easing, most of that money went into financial asset creation or consumer consumption. That will put pressure on inflation. Well, it didn't go into nominal GDP transactions, which is the small, medium enterprises that produce the goods in this country. I'm sorry, it's one of my real hobby horses. You can't have a country that's wealthy that's not producing goods. You know, the reality is, and there is Professor John Werner has been speaking about, he invented the word quantitative easing, wrote the books Princes of Vienna, and he's been speaking about this now for a considerable amount of time. If you don't have credit creation through local banking, China made a decision in the 80s to follow the German model, which is cooperative. So they have 4,000 banks. We have very few left in this country. America has 5,000. Germany has, I think, probably the biggest in Europe. ECB has cut down most of all the banks. And in the UK, what banks do we have left?
Nothing.
What we have
nothing.
specialist banks. We have high street banks. With
Mike, I've got to move on.
But
I've got to get the others in there, but we need to have a separate bit for you because you know all about it and we need you. Brian Dugan, you're there in Solihull.
Economics. Google Werner
Let me get Brian Dugan. I've got to get Brian Dugan on. Brian.
Hi, Nana. Well, nobody is saying that the banks are necessarily in touch with the common people either. But the government certainly isn't. And what the Prime Minister came out with today is a manifestation of that. And hold your nerve. It's patronising. It fails to address really what the issues are. But it is indicative of where this Tory government has been for some time, full of their own vanities. They're absolutely mired in their own party politics. Nadine Dorris is more concerned with finding out, getting to the bottom of why she hasn't been made a Dame than she is with addressing the problems, the real problems, food, energy, inflation, services, living concerns that occupy everyone else's minds. Danny's right. We're getting to the end of this government. What we need is a bonfire of the vanities. And I hope it's sooner rather than later.
All right, let's go to Amanda Hindley in Kent.
Hi, Nana. I don't think the government could be any further removed from the people, to be honest. Firstly, how patronising to say hold your nerve. It's easy to say hold your nerve if you've got 530 million quid in the bank. And also, how are we going to tighten our belts anymore? We don't have butlers to get rid of or third holidays to lose. He's not focusing on the actual real people of Britain. He's just focusing on the few again. And it's always the same.
Always the same. Hold your nerve, people. Don't worry, it's going to cost you more. We'll get through this. No, he'll get through it. Listen, thank you, Seshni. Good to talk to you. Mike in Oxfordshire, Amanda in Kent and Brian in Solihull. Thank you so much for your thoughts. Those are my great British voices. Let's move on to this story that caught my eye today. Taxpayers faced £170 a year green levy on top of their energy bills within a few days. The government are going to suddenly cut off its subsidy for the net zero. The 2-year suspension of green levies, which came into place just 6 months ago, will be reportedly end at the start of July. That's according to The Telegraph. The government is placing the cost back on households as energy bills are set to fall by an average of almost £500 next month. So what do you think about these green levies?
I think if there's a mandate that you must pay 170 nicker for a net zero aspiration, I think you should go to the public and ask the public whether, in the form of a referendum, listen, we're after net zero, do you want to come along with us? By the way, it's going to cost you 170 nicker every year. There are certain things now that I'm thinking, like, for example, the licence fee, that's nearly 170 nicker.
Well,
that's 300, yeah, the BBC, that's £350 for every household, and you don't have a choice.
To me, it's completely extraordinary that, first of all, they're reneging on their pledge that it was going to be for 2 years, and after 6 months, they're going to stop it. It's this whole net zero business, this manic pursuit of net zero. I mean, the government is going to pursue hydrogen is apparently the great fuel of the future. Well, if it is, let the private sector do it. Don't put our money into it. Why? I mean, why aren't we fracking as a fairly basic thing? Why aren't we using the fuels that we've got?
Or even the coal.
Or even exactly the coal. Instead of which they're just. I have to say, some of this I think is a legacy from Boris, and I blame Mrs. Boris, because she was so woke. She was off the spectrum.
No, but if you think but Boris's dad is an environmentalist.
Yes, I know.
Boris is into the environment as well.
Exactly.
Maybe he's met somebody who has a similar viewpoint to him.
David Cameron started it all. We can't afford this. I mean, China is spewing out coal-fired stations, building them at 6 to the dozen, and yet we think with our tiny little percentage of coal-fired power stations that we're destroying the planet.
Well, but they're doing it for us, though. They're doing it for us because we're buying stuff from them, and then we can offset. We can say, no, we're not making it because the carbon's not coming from us.
So we feel good about it.
I went to Llandudno
it makes no difference
3 weeks ago. Beautiful seaside resort, North Wales. And just outside Liverpool, you can see in the port, they've got about 50 windmills. Not one of them was turning.
No. Of course it wasn't.
What the hell's the point of them?
There's no wind.
If it gets really hot, solar panels don't work. If it gets
they melt.
I mean...
this is not.
It's a real kick in the teeth, isn't it? At this moment, when everybody's struggling with their mortgages and struggling to get a grip, they then whack this.
Hold your nerve.
Hold your nerve.
Hold your nerve.
Hold your nerve. Hey, people, hold your nerve. Right. Well, listen, I've got some supplements for you, and my Supplement Sunday. And my panel have found some great stories that caught out. Like, just joined us. I'm joined by author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton, and also broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly. Danny, let's start with you. It's about snakes on the
It is. Did you know that if you see a snake that may have escaped its home, there's a snake hotline, and this snake hotline, the phone is ringing off the hook because in the summer, in the heat, snakes sliver around, and there's 700,000 as pets. Why the hell do you want a snake as a pet? What a horrible creature.
No, but there's some people like them.
Well, 700,000 people love them. But from my point of view, they're horrible.
They've got rid of them. They've let them run away because they've had enough of them. 100
calls a month on the snake hotline. I know Nana's supplements about fat guys, so...
Well, I'll get to that. Don't you tell me.
Mine.
Christine, what's yours about?
Mine is treats in store for you two, because life gets better when you're 70. Britons feel the least valued when they're in their late 50s. This is for a variety of reasons. Some of them feel sidelined at work, which drains their confidence. Declining social life. Well, I don't remember mine declining in my 50s. A dawning that your dreams may never be fulfilled. That's what people in the 50s are going through. But as people pass retirement age, their self-worth that begins to decline apparently in your 30s, 40s and 50s. Suddenly you forget all that and you have an absolute upsurge as people approach and pass retirement, and they're happier and they're more contented, etc. And I can vouch for that.
Well, I can't vouch for the 50s thing. I'm not in the late 50s, but I'm loving it. It's got better and better and better.
You're in the 30s.
No, I'm not. That's very nice of you, Christine. I wish.
The people in their 20s are found to be the most confident of their value.
I don't know about that. Well, it's finally to my supplement. It's been revealed that a rather unfortunately named NHS Healthy Weight Calculator has been incorrectly advising overweight people to eat hundreds of excess calories per day. Danny,
well,
you've been going on that.
I've never had an underestimation when it came to a reading of BMI.
Well, listen, basically the errors meant that an overweight man trying to lose weight could be advised to eat almost 300 excess calories per day, with around about 240 extra calories allocated to women in the same category. And those following the advice would have consumed basically just 2,086 calories extra per week, equivalent to more than 4 Big Mac burgers.
You noticed I'd lost a couple of pounds. I've hit the gym. I've got my first spin class on Wednesday, which is it's a spin class. It's on exercise bikes. I think I'm going to be the only bloke there, and my weight loss will continue.
Good for you, Danny.
Well done,
well
Danny.
done. Good for you.
Is it lost any more, or is it staying the same?
Well, it's sort of plateaued, but that's because I went to Llandudno.
That's what I asked.
On holiday.
I knew that would be the way. Christine, well, you're a healthy weight. You don't need to.
Well, beautiful figure, both of you.
Well, it gets a hell of a lot more difficult as you get older. I can tell you it gets more difficult.
It's true.
For women when you pass the menopause and all that. But then, the 60s is even more difficult, and the 70s is.
Oh, now you're saying how great it was, and now you're whinging. Right. Well,
I'm not whinging. I'm just saying it's hard. It's hard to keep your sylph-like figure.
Well, listen, on today's show, you look fabulous, Christine. On today's show, we've been asking, is it time to focus on our own military? And according to our Twitter poll, 95% of you say yes. Of course it is, of course it is. Only 5% of you say no. Thank you so much to my panel, author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton. Christine, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
And also broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly.
Thank you.
Danny.
See you next week.
As ever, a huge thank you to you at home for your company. I look forward to seeing you next week at the same time as 3. Enjoy the weather.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel. Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar.